Chapter 841, Bloodline Fusion. Feeling little Algie's fearful emotions, Saul quickly approached it. Before Saul could get there, little Algie, seemingly afraid, suddenly followed Saul's previous instructions, violently turning its head, opening its mouth wide, biting onto the snake's tail, then without chewing, directly swallowing it. The other serpents quickly approached little Algie, apparently wanting to rescue their companion, but were intercepted by Saul's tentacles in time. Little Algie devoured very quickly, swallowing half the serpent that had wrapped around it in the blink of an eye. The serpent finally felt afraid and hurriedly released its mouth, wanting to escape. However, little Algie had already been enraged and sped up its devouring again. With Saul's cooperation, little Algie quickly swallowed an entire serpent, then raised its head to target other serpents. 4 serpents were all dealt with by little Algie within 10 minutes. Saul ended up taking a supporting and spectating role. Little Algie was now stretched to 50 or 60 meters long, and because it had swallowed 4 serpents, its body had become segmented, looking particularly like connected sausages. Eep, 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 eep. After finishing off 4 serpents in one go, little Algie was actually acting cute towards Saul. Saul landed on the ground, looking at the sausage string lying flat on the ground. Little Algie, what were you afraid of? Little Algie was currently severely bloated and could only barely raise its head, struggling to convey information to Saul. After finally understanding little Algie's meaning, Saul immediately felt both amused and exasperated. You were actually afraid of being twisted into a death knot again by that serpent. With little Algie's current appearance, it definitely couldn't shrink back into Saul's neck either. Saul looked back to see Alfonso's side was troublesome but manageable, so he didn't actively help. Instead, he sat on little Algie's bloated belly and quietly took out the previously inscribed soul-fixing needle nameplate, continuing to familiarize himself with the runic formations on it. At the same time, sitting here could prevent monsters from breaking through his side and affecting Royer, who was picking Moonlight Manny. After about an hour like this, little Algie suddenly deflated like a balloon losing air. Phew! Little Algie opened its mouth and exhaled a stream of black smoke. Saul stood up accordingly, finished digesting. Little Algie hung its head dejectedly, seeming to want to say it didn't taste good. Mental power came from behind. Saul had little Algie return to his neck, then stood up and flew toward where Royer was. Just as he flew into the air, he saw Alfonso's side suddenly burst with a large mass of black smoke, enveloping all the human head-sized bees that had been pestering him. Then large amounts of bee remains mixed with strangely colored fluids crashed down, immediately staining the sand a dark green. White smoke continuously emerged from the sand. After venting like this, Alfonso also flew toward Royer's direction. Indeed, Alfonso was also annoyed by those bees. Saul chuckled softly. If little Algie hadn't suddenly exerted itself and devoured all the monsters, having him deal with these unkillable, uncuttable serpents alone for an hour would have made him irritated too. Saul landed and saw Royer carefully holding a box. "How much did you pick?" Saul asked. Only then did Royer look up, revealing a big smile. "Enough for 7 or 8 uses." "Don't call me for this kind of thing again," Alfonso said gloomily. Royer didn't care at all, putting one hand on Alfonso's shoulder. "Then you'd better pray I can complete the bloodline fusion experiment before using up all this Moonlight Manny." Alfonso pursed his lips, the downward curve of his mouth deepening. The two had conflicting views. If Royer's experiment succeeded, his experiment would probably be terminated. Under the chief's orders, he had obediently come to help, but asking him to hope for Royer's mermaid modification experiment to succeed was too much. "All right, let's hurry back. Didn't you say Moonlight Manny needs to be used within an hour of being picked?" Saul helped Alfonso out of the awkward situation. Royer also stopped teasing Alfonso. Several people quickly packed up, returned to the carriage, then went back to Evernight Palace through the teleportation array. After that, Alfonso returned to the palace alone. Saul followed Royer to the estate where Vanessa and Harry lived. Since they had departed at dusk and were now returning in the latter half of the night, when they reached the estate, even the night watch servants were in a drowsy state. They simply entered Harry's bedroom directly and pulled him from bed. "Who's there, help?" Harry had been on edge these past days. Although his mother Vanessa had told him repeatedly that the experiment would definitely succeed because they also had royal bloodline, he was still very afraid that after the experiment failed, he'd be sent back to the countryside again, unable to take a single step out. So when Royer's cold fingers grabbed his arm, Harry's first reaction was thinking someone was going to send their mother and son back to the countryside. Smack! Royer unceremoniously slapped his forehead. "Get up and go to the laboratory." Harry was stunned, then recognized the speaker as Wizard Royer, also the person who had saved them. "Yes, my lord." He hurriedly got up. Just as he was about to put on clothes, he heard Royer's urging, so he followed Royer wearing only his soft blue nightgown. Saul crossed his arms, watching Royer drag the person out, then turned to head to the laboratory first. He had only visited this laboratory once or twice, but had already roughly familiarized himself with the equipment here. When Royer and Harry followed behind and entered, he had already quickly arranged all equipment and instruments on the table. "Let's begin." Royer raised his hand and threw Harry onto the experimental table, though he used levitation magic halfway, so the person landed gently on the surface. "Saul, I'll start processing the Moonlight Manny. You first bleed this kid." "How much?" "Half, I guess. Handle it based on his physical condition." Having seen some of Saul's experiments, Royer trusted his abilities greatly. He only gave Saul general instructions before letting him proceed freely. Hearing about bloodletting, Harry first shrank back in fright but didn't dare dodge, only looking at Saul with fearful, panicked eyes. Saul didn't comfort the experimental subject. Bloodline fusion experiments weren't guaranteed to succeed. Even the diary couldn't find successful methods in cases destined only for failure. To prevent Harry from moving around, Saul directly knocked him unconscious with one finger. Then he began bloodletting Harry. 20 minutes later, Royer came over with potions. This time the potions were different from before, not in test tubes but in thin, long, soft tubes. He then clamped the tubes nearby and inserted them directly into Harry's arms like IV drips. Royer brought 17 such tubes in total. Finally, little boy Harry was covered with thin tubes all over his body, looking quite horrifying. Royer's smile disappeared as he became serious, taking out a test tube from his chest. Saul had been monitoring Harry's physical data, but upon noticing Royer's action, immediately turned to stare intently at the test tube in the other's hand. Mermaid Royal Bloodline Pure. Chapter 842. Fusion Failed, Bloodline Obtained. Royer naturally noticed Saul's gaze and smiled at him. "I'll go first. If this fails, then you can try." Saul directly spread his hands. "Give me a sample to study first." Royer felt awkward. "Aren't you going to watch how I operate?" Saul patted the iron experimental table. "I used to work in morgues. I'm best at human experiments." "Fine." Royer saw Saul's confidence and could only first extract a sample of bloodline to hand to Saul. Saul took the bloodline and, ignoring Royer's progress, directly returned to another experimental table and took out various instruments to begin observation. He now had obtained the water god's mermaid bloodline, the mermaid bloodline from Pearl's body, and now the original mermaid bloodline. He had kept a portion of each. It wasn't that he wanted to research mermaid modification, but mainly to study the principles of bloodline inheritance through the differences and changes in these bloodlines. So-called bloodlines weren't just as simple as blood and the cells within. Otherwise, there wouldn't be situations like puppet Emperor Sander sowing seeds monthly only to end up with nothing. While observing, he suddenly heard Royer Tusk from his side. Only then did Saul look up. Failed. Royer turned back, his expression already restored to calm. Yes, the bloodline became polluted, but I removed it in time. Only then did Saul stand up and go over, discovering Harry's entire right arm had been severed. The severed arm was now lying quietly in a crystal tray, its skin developing needle-like holes at a visible rate. These holes were continuously growing larger, from less than a millimeter in diameter to a centimeter in diameter. The entire arm was covered with holes, looking so disgusting it made one's skin crawl. Saul didn't rashly use tentacles to absorb the pollution. He had methods for dealing with black tide pollution, but unknown bloodline pollution still required caution. Even having reached third rank, he couldn't just charge into everything. Finally, that left arm turned into a honeycomb-like hollow frame under the observation of two third-rank wizards. The blood and bones inside had completely disappeared. The original mermaid royal bloodline is too domineering, so it directly devoured Harry's body. Fortunately, you acted quickly, otherwise his entire person would probably be gone. After watching the arm's transformation, Saul seriously analyzed the reasons for experimental failure. Royer had long known that bloodline fusion experiments weren't so simple, so the first failure didn't exceed his expectations. This time, why don't you try, Saul? All right. Saul didn't decline either. He directly took the liquid Royer had prepared and worked on Harry's other arm. Because the previous attempt had resulted in Harry's arm being directly annihilated due to the mermaid bloodline being too domineering, Saul chose much more cautious measurements than Royer this time. But even being very cautious, Harry's body still couldn't withstand the mermaid bloodline. Even after the bloodline was diluted through bonding agents and injected into veins, it immediately caused flesh and blood to lose vitality. Although it didn't develop the strange honeycomb appearance from before, it became like withered tree branches, losing all activity. Saul wasn't surprised by his own failure. His emotions didn't change at all as he continued seriously recording experimental reactions and data. Royer had been watching from the side. Seeing Saul also fail, he somehow felt relieved. He had invited Saul naturally because he acknowledged the other's abilities. But if he, who had researched for so many years, was surpassed by Saul in one attempt, that would be somewhat embarrassing. Saul didn't pay attention to what Royer was thinking. He took his recent experimental data and began comparing it with Royer's first experimental data. As he looked, his brow gradually furrowed. Royer was also analyzing data. Seeing Saul motionless for a long time, he stepped forward. I'll proceed with the third attempt. Saul retreated to the back, yielding the position. Next, Royer conducted third and fourth experiments. However, each attempt failed. Now, even though Royer had prepared for several failures, his expression didn't look so good anymore. Before conducting experiments, he had done careful calculations, yet still couldn't see the dawn of success. Other materials were one thing, but the original mermaid royal bloodline wasn't plentiful. Having failed 4 times already, Royer didn't want to conduct a 5th attempt. He followed Saul's example, taking the 4 sets of experimental data to analyze. At this time, Saul put down the materials in his hands and came to Royer's side to unceremoniously copy a set. Let's stop here for today, Saul said flatly. If we can't find the specific reasons for failure, consuming more bloodline would just be wasteful. Royer exhaled. You're right. There's clearly a problem with the experimental design approach. If we can't find the fundamental cause, there's no point in continuing experiments. Saul pointed at Harry on the experimental table, who no longer looked human. Will you handle him? Royer sighed helplessly. The current royal bloodline only includes him and Alexandra. We can't let him die yet. You go back, I'll heal him. Fine, but even if you heal him, getting him to recover mentally and clearing residual pollution will probably take half a month, Saul reminded him. Royer calculated the time. I know. Before the black tide arrives, there's only one experimental opportunity. If it still can't succeed, I'll go back to strengthening Red Sea trees. Regarding temporarily enhancing Red Sea trees' pollution absorption capabilities, Royer was still quite skilled. Saul nodded and left directly. After Saul left, Vanessa, who had long been awakened, appeared at the laboratory door. She immediately saw her son lying on the experimental table, no longer human in form. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. But she only cried silently, without speaking to stop Royer from continuing experiments. Royer naturally noticed Vanessa's appearance. His mood wasn't as calm as when Saul was present. Continuous failures, with completely no experimental data showing any approach to success, made his heart extremely irritated. Seeing Vanessa, he directly spat out one word. Scram! Vanessa covered her mouth, not daring to make a sound, and hurriedly turned and ran. Just as Royer was preparing to heal Harry, an unremarkable candlestick in the laboratory corner suddenly lit up. The warm yellow light sphere wasn't very bright. It didn't even illuminate its corner, but Royer immediately put down his tools and hurriedly turned to look. Did he act? A low voice sounded within Royer's soul body. No, Royer answered respectfully. The voice from the candlestick showed no change. Next time bring him to conduct mermaid modifications. Royer was stunned, instinctively wanting to explain his bloodline fusion experiment, but the words at his lips became, yes. Hiss. The candlestick extinguished. From beginning to end, the voice in the light source never asked a single question about bloodline fusion. Royer's fist slowly clenched. This feeling of not having expectations for him really wasn't pleasant. He temporarily didn't want to deal with Harry. Leaving him out for a night wouldn't kill him anyway. He wanted to find some diversion. It couldn't be Vanessa. She was still useful and couldn't die. Several hours later, Royer got up from a bed full of severed limbs, gently sucking his blood-stained fingers. By now his mood had calmed down. Alfonso, I've already helped you this much. You mustn't really walk down that path of no return. Chapter 843, Letters That Can't Be Sent. Escaper Continent. One of the Stargate Council's affiliated stations. Corey finished organizing the materials in her hands and leaned back against the high-backed chair. Today's work was done, but the remaining time could probably only be used for meditation. There wasn't time for any other slightly complex experimental research. Although Corey's expression was impassive, she was actually somewhat dejected. Since failing to compete with Saul for the qualification to advance to third rank, she could only accumulate resources and contributions on her own. This resulted in her having endless tasks every day, without enough time for self-improvement. If she really did have the day when she'd saved enough resources, would she still be able to complete advancement? Corey shook her head. She didn't have the energy to think about these things now. Recently, many things had happened at the port she was stationed at, and even some wizards had become strange. Especially Wizard Oral, his recent behavior was so strange that it made Corey suspect whether he had undergone mutation. After Wizard Oral's last confrontation with Saul, his temper had become increasingly odd. Previously, he'd focused more on cultivating demonic creatures and had abnormally fanatical interest in various plants, so his daily diet consisted mostly of meat he wasn't interested in. But recently, he had started eating grass. This made Corey very confused. If it were just this, Corey would only find it strange and wouldn't think of mutation. What made her uneasy was more about another matter. Corey discovered that Wizard Oral sometimes seemed to have hallucinations. Once when Corey was reporting recent work to Wizard Oral, he was listening when suddenly his expression changed. He wrote a note, then stood up wanting to put it in the transmission device nearby. But after putting the note in, he didn't activate the device. Instead, he sat back down and had Corey continue reporting. Although it was brief, Corey noticed there was already a thick stack of notes in the transmission device. Just a casual glance showed about 10 or so. At the time, Corey wondered, if the notes don't need transmission, why put them in the device? And normally, notes that have been transmitted should be destroyed. The stack of notes in the transmission device indicated that Wizard Oral had already placed many notes inside. However, the information on those notes might not have been transmitted at all. Corey didn't know what was written on the notes. According to rules, she shouldn't inquire either, because the content might be secrets her level shouldn't access. So although Corey found it strange, she didn't say much. Later, Corey discovered that when Wizard Oral went out with his wooden coffin, he would repeatedly organize the roots in the coffin. Sometimes, he would even use his hands to grab air from outside and put it in the coffin, as if he had really caught something. But Corey saw nothing. Even her mental power didn't sense any objects present. Most crucially, when Corey discussed Wizard Oral's abnormalities with other wizards, they felt nothing was wrong. Hasn't Wizard Oral always been like this? They would even say such things. This left Corey stunned before returning to her expressionless state. Corey sat at the long office table, thinking carefully. The current abnormal situation has exceeded my understanding. Could it be that the council is planning something internally, and because I'm from the Glare family, I'm being excluded? After thinking it over, Corey could only reach this conclusion. Regardless, this situation must be reported to the Patriarch. Maybe the Patriarch will understand what's really happening here. Thinking this, Corey made up her mind, took out a fresh piece of parchment, and wrote down her recent discoveries and speculations. After writing everything, Corey rolled up the parchment, walked to a corner of the room, and deliberately lit a lamp. Both the Glare family patriarch and the tribunal chief were wizards who specialized in light attributes. There had even been rumors that Tribunal Chief Frym and Glare Patriarch Norton were actually two branches inherited from the same ancient wizard. But neither had ever acknowledged this. Corey was now using this special lamp to transmit her letter. The normal procedure was for her to hold the rolled parchment letter over the wick for 5 seconds, and the letter's content would be transmitted to clan members in the Glare world side. Afterward, to prevent others from discovering the letter's content, Corey would throw the parchment into the fuel furnace below the lamp to completely destroy it. However, today, when Corey's hand holding the parchment was only halfway raised, she suddenly threw the letter into the fuel furnace below. The furnace fire crackled, flames eagerly licking the parchment, turning the pale yellow parchment into fragile black ashes. At this time, if someone carefully searched the fuel furnace, they might find many similar black ashes. Corey stood silently before the fuel furnace until everything disappeared, then sat back behind the long table, leaning against the chair in a daze. Work has been so busy lately. If this continues, I won't even have enough time for meditation. The expressionless Corey thought somewhat irritably. Saul, are you writing a letter? After being sulky for a while, Alfonso finally came to find Saul, only to discover him sitting behind a table, writing something. Looking closer, The first line of the letter read, "Respected Master Gorsa." Alfonso pursed his lips, not knowing what he was thinking. After a moment's pause, he asked that pointless question. Saul had noticed Alfonso when he entered. He didn't hide the content of his letter, openly displaying it for Alfonso to see. This letter was already over 10 pages long. There was no choice. When wizards wanted to discuss serious matters, without clearly explaining causes and effects and formula calculations, it was hard to accurately convey one's meaning. What Saul was writing mainly related to wizard body transformation. Among the wizard body transformation masters he knew was his master Gorsa. Although Saul's current level had caught up to Gorsa's, he knew Master was working hard to advance to 4th rank, and had long declared he would complete advancement within a year or two. He was probably at a critical moment of advancement now. Therefore, after long consideration, Saul decided to write to Master Gorsa for discussion. Though Saul didn't avoid Alfonso, Alfonso didn't peek at Saul's letter content. Having only seen the letter's opening, Alfonso could roughly guess what Saul would write about. Reportedly, Saul and Royer's bloodline fusion experiment wasn't going very smoothly either. 2 consecutive experiments had failed to achieve their purpose. Moreover, their test subject Harry was nearly collapsed. Saul must now be consulting his master about bloodline fusion matters. However, when Saul looked up, he gave an answer contrary to Alfonso's expectations. "Yes, writing to my master. He's very skilled at creating various vessels and magical modifications. I'm thinking that mermaid pollution might involve important changes in their bodies that we've overlooked. I'm consulting my master on how to discover these physical abnormalities and turn them into advantages." Chapter 844, Information Channels. Alfonso was somewhat surprised. He had originally thought Saul had given up on the mermaid treatment plan. These days, Saul had also been researching new mermaid royal bloodline fusion experiments with Royer. Although no news of successful trials had come through, it was still better than his side having no progress at all. "I thought you had already given up on treating mermaids," Alfonso said bluntly. "How could I? Isn't this the task I came here for?" Regardless of what he thought inside, Saul was very responsible in his words. Alfonso glanced at the letter Saul had already begun folding and sealing. "Are you going to send it to Wizard Gorsa now? He should be at the Sighing Wall at this time, also preparing to deal with black tides." The black tide crisis from the Abyssal Eye, naturally, wouldn't only target Nefrit continent. The crisis at the Red Sea trees would naturally also affect the northernmost Sighing Wall simultaneously. Even if Gorsa could receive this letter before the black tide, he might not have the energy to study the data Saul provided, let alone reply. "You should have long-distance communication methods, right? Can you help me send an express delivery?" Saul smiled and directly handed the letter to Alfonso. Alfonso took the letter without looking at its contents. "I can only guarantee the letter will reach where Gorsa is within 3 days, but when he'll see it and when he'll reply, I can't guarantee." "That's already very appreciated." Saul moved closer to Alfonso. "Regarding this magic for transmitting information between different continents, do I have permission to learn about it?" Saul thought that if he needed to communicate with his 5 Symphony of Fate targets in the future, he couldn't rely entirely on telepathic connections. It would be best if they could communicate directly through methods. However, Alfonso shook his head. Currently, major wizard factions basically all have long-distance communication methods, but they won't publicly announce communication methods, because once communication methods are discovered, it could lead to internal information leakage. Saul was somewhat disappointed. "Isn't there a public information channel? We could completely make information channels public but encrypt the information." Alfonso thought for a moment but still shook his head. Encryption by low-rank wizards is too easily cracked by high-rank wizards. Hearing this, Saul wanted to mention physical encryption, but thinking carefully, physical encryption would require something like a codebook, but such things only had value when undiscovered. If found by someone, it would be public information. In a wizard world where souls and memories could be searched, codebooks really couldn't be kept secret from high-rank wizards. Saul thought about it and simply gave up on establishing physically encrypted information channels. If it wasn't important information, he could completely have other wizard factions help transmit information. For particularly important information, he'd need to find a way to establish his own information transmission channel in the future. The most crucial aspect of such a transmission channel was secrecy. Saul thought about it and planned to visit the prismatic world again before the black tide arrived. If he could establish a channel in the prismatic world, though the consumption would be greater, it would definitely be secret. These thoughts only circulated in Saul's mind, without revealing any external signs. Seeing Saul remain silent, Alfonso thought he had given up on establishing information channels. Thinking that Saul still hadn't given up on treating mermaids, he finally said, "If you need to transmit information in the future, you can use the tribunal's shared information channel. I'll give you information permissions. Thank you very much." Having finished discussing the letter, Alfonso remembered he had come to find Saul about the black tide assault in a month. "Since you haven't given up on treating mermaids, I plan to conduct the last treatment experiment before the black tide arrives the day after tomorrow. Do you want to participate?" Saul had always believed Alfonso didn't truly want to cure the mermaids. Although he had also proposed and practiced many experimental plans, in Saul's view, they all treated symptoms rather than root causes. This so-called treatment might not even be that important originally. Atavistic mermaids had lost their high resistance to black tides, and their pollution mutations from black tides would significantly infect other mermaids. So the fastest treatment plan now would be to first isolate all atavistic mermaids. If there were no treatment methods, just kill them directly. Most simple. Alfonso focused his main attention on how to prevent atavistic mermaids from being polluted, or how to make their pollution symptoms non-contagious. The experiments Saul could participate in on his side were only single mermaid treatments. Whether Saul wanted to research atavistic mermaids or mermaid royal bloodlines, Alfonso intentionally or unintentionally prevented or delayed him. In short, the other party didn't want Saul to truly research in depth. Most importantly, when Saul observed the source of pollution on Coral, the mermaid with rose-red hair, he discovered an interesting phenomenon. He found that the body parts where pollution appeared on Coral were actually exactly the same places each time. As if pollution wasn't spreading from the sea to the mermaid's body, but rather some part of the mermaid's body had developed a pollution source. Just considering Coral's life, Saul's experiments were limited. Such repetition might be accidental due to insufficient sample size. But Saul was very sensitive to black tide pollution, so even just one instance of pollution appearing in the same location was enough for him to note carefully. After discovering this point, Saul wasn't as active in treating mermaids anymore. Since Saul began researching bloodline fusion experiments with Royer, Alfonso had also received orders to suspend mermaid treatment research. But why bring it up again today? Could there be other unavoidable reasons? Sure, Saul readily agreed. As long as circumstances allowed, he wouldn't miss any experiments related to mermaids and Red Sea trees. Time flew by, and it was the third day. Saul followed Alfonso to the clear water-deep pool beside the Red Sea. This time when Alfonso came over, he actually brought along mermaid Princess Pearl, who had never left the palace. Pearl lay on Alfonso's shoulder, Seemingly leaving water for such a long time for the first time, she looked somewhat wilted, but her pair of pearl-white pupils still curiously examined the surroundings, like a child leaving home for the first time. Beside the clear water pool, two people were already standing. Royer and third rank Wizard Stuart from Black Flame Empire. Seeing Stuart, Alfonso was somewhat surprised and also a bit displeased. After all, he hadn't invited Stuart to this experiment. Hi, Royer first raised his hand to greet them both. But due to the new bloodline fusion experiments continuously going poorly, his smile was no longer as brilliant and cheerful as before. Alfonso pursed his lips. Given Stuart's status, he ultimately didn't directly tell him to leave. He placed Pearl by the water pool but used magic to set up a restraint, allowing Pearl to enter the water but not leave more than 3 meters from the restraint. Then Alfonso directly pulled Royer aside and began communicating using secret speech magic. Saul was here with the mindset of watching drama and stealing intelligence anyway, so he didn't care about other people being present. Instead, he actively approached Stuart to greet him. Wizard Stuart, will you wait here until the Black Tide arrives to participate in battle? Chapter 845, Ambiguous. When black tides arrived, large numbers of polluted and mutated monsters would emerge from the seabed, slaughtering and destroying everything they encountered. Although Evernight's Red Sea trees could absorb black tide pollution, they had no resistance against monsters. So the wizard's defensive line against black tides was actually set up around the perimeter of the Red Sea tree forests. They had to kill monsters before they approached, to prevent massive damage to Red Sea trees that would affect pollution absorption from black tides. If Wizard Stuart was staying until the black tide arrived, he would probably also participate in battle. Currently, among Evernight's third-rank wizards, probably only Saul hadn't been assigned battlefield combat tasks. Seeing Saul, Stuart immediately recalled his secret conversation with Emperor Alo a few days ago. Meeting Saul again now, many complex emotions flashed through his heart. However, he had always been emotionally reserved and didn't show it. But Saul didn't rely entirely on his eyes to read people. Brother Saul, Penny carefully told Saul from within the diary, this person's emotions change greatly when looking at you. Oh, Saul immediately realized Stuart might know something or was planning to do something to him, which explained his different emotional expression compared to when they discussed problems together a few days ago. Saul and Stuart hadn't interacted much. They had only discussed Red Sea tree issues together. What could the other party know that would cause such emotional fluctuations when facing him, even alerting Penny? With so many people present, Saul temporarily set aside his desire to verify. Thinking of the deliberately preserved mark on his body, he decided to secretly follow Stuart after the experiment to see. As long as he didn't follow the other party to the Black Flame Emperor, he wouldn't be discovered. Seeing Royer and Alfonso's whispered conversation wasn't finished yet, Saul approached Stuart to chat. Regarding the issue we discussed last time about Red Sea trees being completely suppressed by Black Sea trees, have you thought of any solutions? Stuart was just looking for a topic and quickly followed up. Red Sea trees and Black Sea trees are essentially more like animals, so the natural bloodline suppression between them is hard to change through artificial domestication. My idea is to imitate the method used on mermaids, destroy part of Red Sea trees' instincts. Could this make Red Sea trees lose their instinctive fear of Black Sea trees? Destroy Red Sea trees' instincts, Saul considered Stuart's proposal. Although the other party lived on Nefrit continent, his research on Red Sea trees wasn't extensive. Though Red Sea trees' characteristics were more animal-like, they lacked consciousness or souls as complete entities. Wanting to destroy the specific instinct of fearing Black Sea trees was extremely difficult. If there was a mistake, and the scattered consciousness of Red Sea trees was damaged. They might even lose their initiative to absorb pollution. The tribunal would definitely, immediately conduct humanitarian destruction to prevent affecting the survival capabilities of Red Sea tree groups. However, Stewart's suggestion made Saul more confident about his original idea. Saul also wanted to utilize Red Sea trees' instinctive fear of Black Sea trees. Stewart thought this instinct could be destroyed. Saul believed this instinct could be exploited. The two discussed some details about instincts. Then Alfonso and Royer returned together. Alfonso's expression showed no change. Royer still had a smile on his face, but wasn't as happy as before. "Good, let's start now." Alfonso didn't care about Royer's mood and began explaining the experiment's operational procedures to the three. "Currently, we haven't found methods to prevent diseased mermaids from falling ill. No, we can't say we haven't found any." The three were immediately intrigued. "You found a method." Saul was the most concerned. Alfonso coughed lightly. "Actually, you all know this method, separate mermaids from black tides." Royer laughed exaggeratedly. "If mermaids are separated from black tides, how will we clear pollution from Red Sea tree root stems? If mermaids can't do this, what's the point of raising them?" Alfonso immediately explained. "Currently, only atavistic mermaids develop pollution diseases. Other mermaids aren't affected. So I want to use Pearl's ability to summon all atavistic mermaids in the Red Sea, then isolate them. This way, during the upcoming black tide pollution, we won't worry about mass mermaid infections." "Is this the last experiment?" Saul was somewhat disappointed. This shouldn't even count as an experiment, but rather a cleanup of the mermaid population. In that case, he had no need to participate. Better to return and race against time, continuing his own experiments. "Not just that. I also want to use this opportunity to experiment on different bloodline concentration, atavistic mermaids' resistance to black tide pollution." Alfonso looked around at the three. "So I'm asking you all to record data on multiple subjects together." Saul was about to agree when his peripheral vision suddenly caught what seemed like a small head emerging from the deep water pool. He turned to look and discovered Pearl, the mermaid rarely brought out of the palace by Alfonso, was watching their group of four with keen interest. "Can I be responsible for recording Pearl's data?" "Pearl," Alfonso immediately said, "I brought her to attract atavistic mermaids from the sea. As the mermaid with the richest royal bloodline, Pearl naturally has appeal to other atavistic mermaids. Though she can't do other things, she can still lure mermaids out, so Pearl won't participate in." However, before Alfonso finished speaking, Royer suddenly slapped Alfonso's shoulder, directly interrupting him. "Hey, we're not going to slaughter this white-haired mermaid. Just conduct one black tide pollution experiment. Besides, having Saul in charge is perfect, right? He's best at treating black tide pollution, so having him record data is safest." Stewart stood nearby looking up at everyone, taking in all their performances with his small eyes. Alfonso was originally worried, but couldn't resist Royer's jokingly forceful suggestion. Finally, he could only look at Pearl with concern and reluctantly agree. Pearl had been staring at the four people and happened to make eye contact with Alfonso, immediately showing a sweet smile. Then everyone began executing their respective responsibilities according to Alfonso's experimental procedures. Alfonso first walked to the deep water pool and lifted the mermaid princess by placing his hands under her armpits. The mermaid princess showed no resistance, obediently emerging from the water. She looked at Alfonso close by and approached with a face full of smiles. Alfonso also leaned forward, but he used his forehead to press against Pearl's forehead. With their foreheads touching, Pearl's approaching movement was halted. She rolled her eyes forcefully to look at Alfonso so close by, seemingly still wanting to get closer, but her body was restrained by some force and couldn't move nearer. Saul stared intently at the two. He sensed mental power emanating from Alfonso being transmitted through the contact point of their foreheads. It seemed he was using a special method to convey information to Pearl. Pearl's soul body was incomplete. According to water god Floco's analysis, someone had deliberately damaged Pearl's soul body. This made it very difficult for her to understand others' thoughts and commands. Therefore, getting her to obediently lure out atavistic mermaids from the Red Sea wasn't easy. Alfonso had cared for Pearl for many years and seemed to have figured out how to communicate with Pearl, transmitting his commands more accurately to her mind. This should have been a very proper, serious matter, but Saul watched Pearl lifting her small eyes, excitedly and eagerly glancing at Alfonso, making him feel something was strange. The atmosphere between this person and mermaid, why did it seem somewhat ambiguous? Suddenly sensing intense emotional changes nearby, Saul kept his head still but glanced sideways at Royer, discovering to his astonishment that his expression had been extremely sinister for an instant. Chapter 846, No Pathogenic Cause. The emotion on Royer's face came quickly and left just as fast. But Saul could still sense the suppressed anger beneath the other's now calm expression. Saul knew Royer looked down on mermaids, viewing the entire population as trash. But he hadn't expected Royer to get so angry when seeing Alfonso and Pearl get close. Could there be other conflicts between them? After glancing around at the two people and one mermaid, Saul turned to prepare for takeoff. Then he heard Penny's laughter again. "Brother Saul, just now when you were looking at others, that little shorty was also observing you." Penny actually described Stuart like that. Saul remained noncommittal. He and Stuart and Royer flew to the Red Sea surface according to their pre-assigned areas. After all three gestured, Alfonso patted Pearl's head. Pearl hesitated for a while, seemingly only then remembering what she was supposed to do, and opened her pale little mouth. Although the mermaid princess opened her mouth, no sound emerged. Saul narrowed his eyes slightly and felt an unstable mental power fluctuation spreading from Pearl toward the ocean. The seawater initially showed no reaction. After about 10 minutes, there were some ripples. After another 10 minutes or so, a mermaid surfaced, looking toward the shore where Pearl was located, with some curiosity and longing on her face. This mermaid was in the area Royer was responsible for. He immediately raised his hand, and the mermaid was scooped up from the seawater by an invisible large hand. Once out of water, the mermaid immediately struggled in panic. Royer wasn't gentle. He directly tightened the invisible hand, and the mermaid didn't struggle long before immediately fainting. Saul quickly reminded him, "Royer, don't kill her." Only then did Royer loosen his grip, letting the mermaid catch her breath. Next came the second, third. They looked toward Pearl's direction with some curiosity and yearning, then were pulled out of the sea one by 3 third-rank wizards guarding the surface. Using about an hour, they caught a total of 11 atavistic mermaids and 136 non-atavistic mermaids. Isn't Pearl only supposed to summon atavistic mermaids? Why did so many come up? Stuart asked puzzledly while sorting the mermaid types. Saul was also selecting mermaids. "I think it's probably not Pearl's fault. These mermaids generally have low intelligence. They probably saw atavistic mermaids swimming toward the surface and followed to watch the excitement." While speaking, Saul also looked at Pearl. Having completed her task, she was placed back in the water. Beside her was also Coral with red hair. The two mermaids looked quite amusing as they simultaneously gazed at Saul and the others, watching them select mermaids. If you didn't look at their fishtails below, they looked like two beauties fresh from bathing. Pleasing to the eye. but Royer smiled contemptuously. This is why we chose to use modified mermaids to absorb Red Sea tree pollution. Controlling them with mermaid royal bloodline is very easy. Modified mermaids aren't as sensitive to black tide pollution, but they feed on Red Sea tree root stems daily. There's always a time when pollution reaches their tolerance limit, Stewart said, looking at the wilted mermaids covering the ground. How do you handle that? Of course. Royer forcefully pounded his right hand into his left palm with a thunk. Compress the useless trash and throw it into the deep sea. This world had no concept of protecting marine environments. In fact, the oceans here weren't something wizards could protect anyway. After explaining the mermaid's final destination, Royer deliberately looked back at Alfonso, who was adjusting potions. But the latter completely ignored him, as if he hadn't heard anything. Including the atavistic mermaids originally in the deep pool, there were 22 atavistic mermaids total. The number wasn't much among hundreds of thousands of modified mermaids, but once pollution diseases appeared in them, they could potentially infect thousands or tens of thousands of nearby mermaids. Still very dangerous. Alfonso's operation using Pearl to concentrate all atavistic mermaids before the black tide assault was very wise. It should have also received tribunal approval. Otherwise, Royer and Stewart couldn't possibly have set aside their work to help him. At this time, Alfonso came over with potions. Nearby atavistic mermaids should all be here. Later I'll take Pearl to other sea areas to collect mermaids. Royer crossed his arms. What, you want us to accompany you along the south coast? No need, Alfonso shook his head expressionlessly. You can return after today's experiment. Local garrison wizards will cooperate with me afterward, and currently atavistic mermaids have only been found in this area. The possibility of them elsewhere is small, so there's no need for you to make wasted trips. Royer seemed to think of something, suddenly smiling again and slapping Alfonso's shoulder. Good, then you take your mermaid princess out for a tour. Just don't forget to come back. Saul remained silent on the side, feeling Royer's words had hidden meanings. Penny also complained in his consciousness. These two seem like friends on the surface, but there's so much drama underneath. Without responding to Penny, Saul stepped forward to take the potion Alfonso had prepared, then walked toward Pearl and Coral. According to their previous agreement, he would conduct black tide pollution experiments on Pearl. But because of Pearl's special status as mermaid princess and her unique ability to summon other atavistic mermaids, Saul had also promised Alphonse he would definitely clear pollution from her body before black tides caused significant harm to Pearl. Coming to Pearl's side, Coral was also watching nearby. Besides these two, Saul was also responsible for 3 other mermaids. The mermaids assigned to him all had the most obvious atavistic features. At least 1/3 of the scales on their tails were cyan. Among these 5 mermaids, Pearl and Coral showed higher intelligence. Their appearances also most closely matched human aesthetics, without strange fish-like features. Without wasting time, Saul used little algae to secure the 5 mermaids to the ground, then injected black tide pollution sources into their bodies. After completing the first step, Saul stepped back 2 paces to observe the 5 mermaids' reactions. None had any reaction. After an hour, Coral was the first to develop rotting wounds. Coral, who had felt nothing before, began crying with pursed lips. Seemingly seeing Coral cry, Pearl also began shedding tears with pitter-patter sounds. The other 3 mermaids hadn't shown abnormal reactions yet, but seeing Pearl and Coral cry, though looking bewildered, they also began tearing up. The mermaids seemed to know no one would care about their tears. Even when crying, they did so silently, quietly by themselves, never thinking to ask anyone for help. Saul stood nearby like a cold-blooded, heartless killer, letting them cry while occasionally checking each mermaid's pollution condition. When a cyan scale fell from Pearl's tail, revealing a small wound underneath, Saul immediately stepped forward to clear the pollution from her body. He simultaneously healed Coral. Pearl hadn't contracted the strange and terrible pollution disease like Coral, but her resistance to black tide pollution was the lowest among atavistic mermaids. The more obvious the atavistic condition, the lower the resistance to black tides, but the lowest resistance still belongs to Coral, who contracted the pollution disease. Coral's bloodline concentration is clearly lower than Pearl's, yet she contracted the disease first. So what exactly caused her illness? Saul walked to Coral and lifted her chin. Coral was forced to look up, her ruby-like eyes gazing at Saul, eye sockets full of tears but no longer overflowing. She looked at Saul without hatred or fear in her eyes, even with a hint of curiosity. Saul looked down at Coral, silently thinking, "I've tried many methods but still can't find the pathogenic cause. Could it be? There is no cause." Chapter 847, Stuart's Warning. Saul had once thought Alphonse wasn't seriously researching methods to treat pollution diseases. But today, he suddenly had new thoughts. Coral's soul body was much stronger than other mermaids, so logically her intelligence should also approach that of normal people. But her external behavior was that of a child who understood almost nothing. Recalling the hidden mental power that quickly disappeared when Saul first ventured deep into the Red Sea seabed, he vaguely felt that mermaids' intelligence might not be as low as Royer determined. But if this was truly as Saul speculated, then these mermaids' current obedient behavior had some problems within it. Saul kept staring at Coral without any expression, but it was precisely this kind of gaze that gradually made the originally innocent-looking Coral stiffen. The tears in her eyes had dried up at some unknown time. She gazed at Saul with her mouth slightly open, motionless. "Is there something wrong with Coral?" Alfonso suddenly appeared behind Saul. "I saw you staring at her for a long time." Only then did Saul release his hand. "Nothing, just suddenly thinking about the pollution disease on Coral." Coral seemed afraid of Saul. After Saul let go and little Algae no longer restrained her, she turned and jumped into the deep pool behind her, disappearing from sight. "Do you have new ideas?" Saul thought for a moment. "Sort of, but I still need experimental verification. The black tide is about to arrive. We don't have enough time. After the black tide passes, let's discuss your ideas and continue experimenting." Alfonso had no intention of probing deeper. He glanced in the direction where Coral had disappeared, then turned to lift Pearl. "That's it for today. I'll depart for other sea areas tomorrow." Alfonso left with the dejected Pearl. Royer threw the remaining mermaids into the deep pool and also had no mood to stay longer. Before leaving, Royer said to Saul, "Harry is dead." Saul was stunned. How did he die? Royer grabbed his hair, somewhat irritated. Too many fusion failures. Even after clearing the pollution, irreversible mutation occurred. With Harry's death, all the potions and energy spent on him were wasted. But at least experience and summaries remained, so it wasn't a complete loss. Well, next I also need to find new bloodline fusion subjects. Since original royalty won't work, I'll search among the great nobles. Their families have many children. They won't be heartbroken if 10 or so die. Royer waved his hand, took off, and disappeared in the distance. Finally, only Stuart remained. "I heard you can teleport instantly." Saul nodded. This wasn't a secret. The other's small eyes lit up. "Can you take me back together?" Convenience was a small matter. Stuart mainly wanted to experience the power changes of different people during teleportation. He had also left coordinates on Saul, so he could sense more clearly. "Want to learn?" Saul immediately saw through the other's thoughts. Stuart felt embarrassed and nodded with a smile. Don't worry, I won't ask about your secrets. I just want to borrow spatial transmission to sense the changes in spatial forces. Doesn't your emperor also teleport instantly? He can, but he rarely teleports, and besides, he is the emperor, my direct superior. Saul thought about it and didn't refuse. Then I'll take you outside the palace. It's not good to teleport inside the royal palace. Saul tried to avoid teleporting inside Evernight Palace. That was Evernight's political and economic center. Accidentally offending something there would be quite troublesome. It was also disadvantageous to Saul's cultivated image of actively cooperating with the tribunal. Good, I also need to go to the Black Flame Embassy outside. Saul stepped forward, placing one hand on Stuart's shoulder, and asked seemingly casually, going back to report to His Majesty the Emperor. Stuart thought about it and felt this wasn't a secret, so he directly informed Saul. No. Emperor Alo has been at the tribunal discussing matters with the tribunal chief recently. I can only temporarily make decisions on many other tasks. Black Flame's emperor wasn't at the embassy. Saul smiled. Indeed, everyone gets busy before black tides arrive. He planned to teleport to the estate where Sanders' stepmother Vanessa lived. Because he had conducted several experiments there before, for convenience, he had simply left a temporary coordinate outside the estate. After preparing, Saul concentrated his thoughts on the semi-transparent thread produced by his temporary coordinate. With a gentle touch, both figures disappeared simultaneously. Then they appeared simultaneously at the estate outside Evernight Palace. Directly in front of Saul was the original estate, but after just a few days, the estate's main gate was tightly closed with a lock hanging on it. Obviously, the people who originally lived here had moved away. How amazing! Stuart still had his eyes closed, carefully feeling the forces of spatial transformation. When Saul was still an apprentice, he had experienced his master Gorsa's spatial teleportation power several times. But he was too weak then, resulting in no sensations. Conversely, third-rank Stuart was more sensitive to the power changes and spatial transformations during teleportation. After a moment, Stuart opened his eyes and thanked Saul. Thank you very much today. If you ever visit Black Flame Empire in the future, you can always come find me. Stuart wasn't just being polite, but he also knew Saul didn't know when he might visit Black Flame Empire. Thinking about it, he said in a low voice, during the Black Tide period, you'd better stay in Evernight Palace and not go to the Red Sea. Saul slowly blinked once, thoughts racing through his mind, then slowly nodded. Thank you for the reminder. I'll seriously consider it. Saul didn't directly agree, and Stuart didn't continue persuading. He shouldn't have been persuading anyway. Then I'll head back first. Stuart's face resumed its original polite smile. He nodded slightly, then turned and flew away. Stuart obviously knows something. He's warning me that if I go to the Red Sea when black tides appear, I might encounter danger. The corner of Saul's mouth lifted, showing no fear. Now that Black Flame's emperor isn't at the embassy either, it's quite a good opportunity. Saul turned around, ignoring the locked gate, and directly vaulted over the wall into the estate. He came to the former laboratory and sat down. The place had been half emptied, leaving only tall, empty shelves and experimental tables. Saul lay back on the experimental table and directly performed astral projection. Herman, you stay here. If anyone approaches, immediately call me. I'll teleport back instantly. Herman, emerging from the diary again, immediately entered Saul's body to temporarily control this physical form. Saul's body had soul-devouring resin modifications for protection, and his soul had diary protection, so he wasn't afraid of others discovering that the soul in his body wasn't his own. Of course, Herman definitely couldn't impersonate him, but as long as he called Saul back the instant he discovered outsiders, it would be fine. So Herman, using Saul's body, opened his eyes to stare at the ceiling, seeming to contemplate some very difficult problem. Meanwhile, Saul immediately threw the mark Stuart had placed on him into the diary's pages to clamp it, then stood and floated toward outside the estate. Just as he floated to the main gate, he suddenly saw a gray, transparent figure standing alone at the entrance. It was a woman whose youth had passed, but who remained beautiful. But she was already dead, her soul transformed into a vengeful spirit, standing at the estate entrance. Vanessa, though he hadn't seen her many times, Saul recognized her identity at a glance. He didn't know how Sanders' stepmother had died, but obviously after Harry's death, she had lost her final support. This life-gambling reversal game, she had lost. Chapter 848, Eavesdropping. To challenge fate, one must be psychologically prepared to be trampled underfoot by fate. Saul flashed past Vanessa's vengeful spirit without absorbing the failed woman's soul, leaving her to stand at the gate for a long time, waiting for hope that would never appear. Black Flame Empire's embassy was in another direction from Evernight Palace, but Saul's soul-floating movement wasn't much slower than flying. Before long, he arrived outside the Black Flame Embassy. This embassy was usually cold and quiet, but now had many people coming and going. Black Flame's emperor personally visiting Evernight was enough to keep them busy. Every day, messages transmitted from within Black Flame territory were decoded, analyzed, screened, prioritized, and finally delivered to Black Flame's emperor. Arriving outside the embassy, Saul saw a team of true wizards standing guard outside. These people couldn't possibly detect Saul, who was already third rank. At this moment, a carriage happened to stop at the entrance. Before the carriage fully stopped, someone inside rushed into the Black Flame Embassy holding a stack of parchments. Saul directly followed behind that person to sneak in, following them through checkpoint after checkpoint, then arriving at the largest and most magnificent building in the back. This building also had quite a few people, but very few formal wizards. Most work here didn't involve magic, so many excellent ordinary people worked here too. This time Saul didn't continue following the person with the stack of parchments. Instead, he sensed once more. The mark Stuart had left on him was still tightly sealed by the diary without any fluctuations leaking out. Then Saul glanced at the room distribution and directly floated upward, passing through the floor. On the highest level of this building, Saul sensed mental power belonging to Stuart. Besides him, there was no other third-rank wizard's mental power. But Saul remained very careful. Others were fine, but if Black Flame's Emperor Elo suddenly returned, Saul's soul concealment methods might not completely fool him. Therefore, when approaching Stuart, Saul continuously sensed carefully whether there were other people's mental fluctuations besides Stuart. Fortunately, no accidents occurred, only Stuart was in the top-level room. However, when Saul saw Stuart's behavior, his eyes widened directly. Stuart was actually sitting on Black Flame Emperor's throne, and even his appearance had changed to look like Elo. If the other's mental power didn't clearly show as Stuart's, Saul would have thought he'd unluckily encountered the worst-case scenario. Recovering from his surprise, Saul carefully hid in a room corner to continue observing Stuart. Why would he transform into Elo's appearance? Could it be that people here don't know Black Flame's Emperor is currently at the tribunal rather than the embassy? Saul initially thought Stuart was trying to deceive others, but considering the other had easily told him this information without requesting secrecy, why would he go through the trouble of deceiving his own faction's people? Maybe he's not trying to hide that Wizard Elo isn't currently at the embassy. Saul's brain raced. Stuart across from him had not only changed his appearance to Wizard Elo's, but even mimicked his bearing and expressions very accurately. If he also disguised his mental power, Saul definitely wouldn't recognize him. He's deliberately releasing his own mental power. This means nearby wizards capable of sensing mental power fluctuations would think Stuart is staying in the room, but he's also mimicking Wizard Alo's appearance and movements. Could his current actions not be about deceiving others, but practicing deceiving others? Saul felt he might have discovered part of the truth, but behind this partial truth remained a fog of mystery. Why would Stuart disguise himself as Wizard Alo? When and where would he formally disguise himself as Wizard Alo? And when Stuart was disguising himself, where would the real Wizard Alo go? Just as Saul couldn't figure it out, the Alo who had been sitting properly suddenly leaned back, half reclining on the Emperor's throne. His form twisted and changed back to Stuart's appearance. My personality is completely different from His Majesty's. Maintaining his aura is so difficult, Stuart muttered. After that, Stuart stopped muttering. He kept his small eyes narrowed with a serious expression, thinking about something unknown. After quite a while, Saul heard Stuart's second sigh. If I could return, I'd also want to take a look at the Abyssal Eye. Saul was even more puzzled. Why suddenly mention the Abyssal Eye? Could Wizard Alo be having Stuart disguise him to secretly go to the Abyssal Eye? As soon as this thought emerged, Saul rejected it. Impossible. Wizard Alo has a vast empire to maintain and his own blood relatives. If something happened to him at the Abyssal Eye, Evernight Empire, which had been peacefully coexisting, would definitely be the first to annex Black Flame. Saul chuckled inwardly. If there's still anyone in this world who dares go to the Abyssal Eye, it would probably only be my master, Gorsa. Halfway through this thought, the smile on Saul's face suddenly disappeared. Wait, could it really be that Master Gorsa wants to go to the Abyssal Eye, and Wizard Alo wants to stop him? Still doesn't make sense. If he's stopping him, why have Stuart disguise as him? It must be that Wizard Alo is going to do something only fourth-rank wizards can do, but this matter can't be known by outsiders. Saul still had no leads, and even felt the puzzle before him had become more complex. Too bad Stuart is a third-rank wizard. Penny has no way to observe his past without alerting him. Wait. Saul's eyes lit up as he thought of a method. Though I can't see the past, I can try looking at the future. Things that will happen in the future are naturally what they're currently plotting. At this time, someone knocked on the door outside. Stuart immediately stopped thinking and walked to his own seat. Enter. The main door was pushed open. The person entering was the messenger Saul had followed earlier. He no longer had so many parchments in his hands, but it looked like there were still many matters to handle. Lord Stuart, the Empire has sent several urgent documents. Bring them here, Stuart said steadily. What followed was one person reporting and another making decisions, with no further discussion of Alo topics. Seeing this, Saul knew there would hardly be any useful information afterward, so he quietly withdrew. Finding another person leaving the embassy, Saul followed behind him and successfully left the embassy. With one teleportation, his soul immediately returned to his own body. Herman, who had been in his body, was instantly squeezed out. Report, Master. No one appeared during this period. Herman reported the situation during this time from within the diary. Responding with a sound, Saul sat up from the cold, hard experimental table. Saul didn't leave the estate. After confirming no one was around, he remained sitting on the cold experimental table and quietly took out his dead wizard's diary. The diary rustled as it turned to a fresh white page. This time Saul didn't plan to check his own death crisis, but to observe other people's deadly futures by manipulating the diary. Will Stuart encounter crises in the next 3 months? On the pristine white page, Lines of neatly written text gradually appeared. Chapter 849, All Dead. Lunar Calendar Year 320, December 19th. The little short wizard doesn't know that the most terrifying thing about masquerade balls isn't removing the mask, but wanting to remove it, yet being unable to. The first half of the ball has already exhausted him. The second half of the ball is enough to make him flee in defeat. When guests begin to disperse, standing center stage to die is his final pride. Stuart would die. Originally, when Saul used the diary to predict Stuart's death, he would naturally see his worst outcome. But what surprised Saul was that this worst death scenario didn't require special conditions to occur. The masquerade ball clearly referred to disguise, and the diary's meaning was that as long as Stuart disguised himself on some future day, he would die violently on the spot. The ball in masquerade ball should refer to some important occasion. An important occasion. What occasion could be more important than black tides attacking Evernight's coast? Could the diary mean this black tide's arrival is extremely dangerous, to the point where even powerful third-rank wizards like Stuart can't escape? Stuart is imitating Wizard Alo, so he should appear center stage under Alo's identity, wanting to leave but unable to, thus ultimately dying. Then where did Wizard Alo go? Will he die in this black tide assault? Saul tried to predict Wizard Alo's death, but the diary showed no reaction. He didn't know if it was because Wizard Alo was a powerful fourth rank who wouldn't die in this black tide, or because Saul had too little connection with Wizard Alo for the diary to monitor his death lines. It's also possible that fourth-rank wizards are too strong, and ordinary white pages don't have enough power to observe fourth-rank futures. Golden pages might work. But Saul couldn't possibly use golden pages to predict events a month away. Golden pages had insufficient energy when predicting third-rank wizards and storm eyes in the borderland, only managing 3 simulations before being unable to help Saul simulate the future. And this black tide's arrival wouldn't just have a few third ranks present, but also 2 fourth-rank wizards. Golden Page's predictions would likely be reduced to just once. That had to be used at the most critical moment. If used early, many accidents before the crisis could cause future changes, so golden pages should be used just hours or even minutes before death, maximally avoiding other factors changing the future. Since I can't predict Black Flame's Emperor, I can try others who might be present. Thinking this, Saul immediately conducted a death prediction for Alfonso. Lunar Calendar Year 320, December 19th. Masks are the beginning of deception. But the ball never belonged to him. Bearing burdens through darkness is for a bright future. But hearts wrapped in gentleness become addicted to warmth. Initially just a thought, later evolving into belief. But the moment the mask is removed is also when death arrives. He thought himself a hidden sage, never realizing he was a dancing clown. What flows down his cheeks is tears of regret or fear of death. This, the 2 predictions matched. Or rather, the scenarios were consistent. Stuart and Alfonso would die in the same event. That made it even more likely to be the Black Tide's arrival. Alfonso also wears a mask, but this mask should be different from Stuart's situation. The diary means his disguise will be exposed and he'll immediately die. Saul's gaze fell on the words sage and clown. What Alfonso wants to do has long been discovered. That's why he's called a clown. What he wants to do won't succeed, and he'll be killed after exposure. Who can immediately kill a third-rank wizard? Saul didn't need to think. Of course it's fourth-rank wizard Frim. Wizard Alo couldn't immediately kill Alfonso. The latter was an important tribunal member after all. Alo would have to consider Frim's reputation. But if Frim wanted to act, no one dared stop him. This was the tribunal's founder, the highest executor of purge orders. Saul sighed softly. Whatever Alfonso wants to do, Frim must have discovered it long ago. After sighing, Saul analyzed further. Another death that doesn't require special conditions to trigger, so according to normal event development, both Stuart and Alfonso will die. Combining recent experiences, Saul already had a hypothesis, but he needed more information to verify it. Saul immediately began a death prediction for the third person, Royer. The diary's white pages again showed Royer's fate. Still a death outcome. Still a death outcome without specific conditions. Saul saw that Royer's prediction also mentioned masks. Saul held his forehead. 3 third-rank wizards, all dying in the same place, even on the same day. He put away the diary and jumped down from the experimental table. This was Saul's first time, simultaneously, conducting death predictions on so many people around him. What a grand performance! Saul walked outside. He had lingered outside for too long. If he didn't return soon, Evernight's people would come looking for him. Should I get involved? Walking outside the estate, standing beside Vanessa's vengeful spirit, from this angle he could see the highest palace roof ridge of Evernight Palace. Vanessa liked standing here, perhaps not to welcome Royer, but to look at the place she once possessed but could only yearn for. Time to see Sander. Saul touched the black branch in his sleeve. When the black tide attacks, perhaps that's when Mido should appear. Saul returned to Evernight Palace and met with Sander again. After brief communication, they separated to handle their respective affairs. The next month, life suddenly became unusually peaceful. Alfonso didn't seek Saul for mermaid treatment. Royer didn't seek Saul for new bloodline fusion experiments, and Stuart remained hidden in the Black Flame Embassy. Saul was also busy. He even suspended his daily observation of the soul-fixing needle's magical formations. To catch up with the Masquerade Ball a month later, to let his personally created Third Symphony of Fate target debut in this gathering storm, he was busy almost day and night. Besides final fusion of the third target, he also began implementing another plan. Establishing encrypted information channels. Saul originally didn't want to start building information channels now. After all, he was unfamiliar with all the formulas and formations involved in this magic. He had postponed establishing information channels until returning to the borderland. But Saul now needed to contact Floco. To create the third target of Symphony of Fate, he had dissolved the mermaid body Floco could remotely possess. Floco couldn't airdrop into Evernight. Though Floco was Saul's second target, they had no direct communication method and currently no other way to transmit information. Now, getting Floco to cooperate with his ideas had become difficult to achieve. So Saul used the excuse of writing to Kelly and Senior Byron in the borderland to apply for encrypted information channel permissions from court wizards. When sending letters, he even curiously requested to personally operate the information transmission formations. Since Saul used low-level encrypted information channels, court wizards didn't refuse his request. And Saul took the opportunity to use his mental power, far exceeding ordinary third-rank wizards, to forcibly memorize the complete structure of the entire information transmission channel's magical formations. Chapter 850, Safe Zone. After sending 2 insignificant letters, Saul rushed back to his temporary palace residence without stopping, dismissed the servants behind him, and immediately replicated the information channel magical formation in his mind onto a thin metal plate. Although copying on parchment was faster, parchment easily deformed. For unfamiliar, complex magical formations, it was better to inscribe them on metal or stone plates that didn't deform easily. Using 3 days, Saul thoroughly understood the entire formation, then began designing on his own. After another 3 days, he successfully designed 3 information channels encrypted in different ways. Now he had completely mastered this not-too-complex magical formation and could consider using the prismatic world's special properties to construct an information channel no one could spy on. However, establishing information channels across world barriers might encounter difficulties I can't imagine. Saul gritted his teeth. No matter, I have to try. Otherwise, even if I participate in this masquerade ball, I probably won't be able to influence the outcome. Saul rearranged the channel connecting to the prismatic world in his laboratory, having Pearl's remnant soul come out to continue serving as his guide. Pearl cooperatively stood in the core formation belonging to her, quietly watching Saul. Ever since learning that Pearl in the prismatic world couldn't return for a very long time, this sharp-tongued and venomous Pearl had become silent. She no longer clamored to be separated from Narella. The two souls on the same black page suddenly got along unusually harmoniously. Having successful experience and mastering the techniques, Saul no longer needed fourth rank power to break through world barrier limitations. Seeing the formation had begun operating and Pearl was ready, he started the ritual to connect to the prismatic world. Just then Pearl suddenly called out to Saul, "Saul." Saul paused his internal magic power circulation and turned to look at Pearl. Pearl's head pursed her lips and said solemnly, "Help me ask that Pearl. If she's really not coming back, then from now on, I'm the true wind sprite and she's just Pearl." Pearl's remnant soul, or rather the wind sprite, was now making a formal separation from her other half-soul. They would no longer be the same individual. The river of fate would flow in different directions. This was the decision the wind sprite had made after long consideration. If she couldn't completely separate from Pearl in the prismatic world, she would forever remain just a remnant soul, but she clearly already had her own independent consciousness. She wasn't part of Pearl, much less Pearl's substitute. She wanted to be an independent individual. "I understand," Saul nodded, "then I'll begin." This time the wind sprite nodded, her expression becoming relaxed. Magic power surged, mental power like an electric current following the already constructed channel, crossing the world barrier that blocked everything, penetrating endless space, arriving at the prismatic world somewhere unknown. Constantly changing colors filled Saul's vision. Coming here again, Saul had new understanding of this place. Those colors seemed to be more than just colors. The energy they contained seemed higher level than mental power and magic power. But Saul currently couldn't touch or analyze them. Perhaps when he reached fourth rank, he could try researching them. "Saul," Pearl's voice rang directly in Saul's consciousness. It seemed she had recovered well here, already reconcentrating her consciousness. If Pearl wouldn't be polluted by knowledge afterward, her future would definitely be much better than staying in the borderland. Of course, the risks here were also much greater. Though happy about Pearl's awakening, Saul had very important matters to handle and didn't have much time for reminiscing. "Pearl, I want to conduct an experiment here." Saul, also transformed into a mass of twisted threads, directly stated his purpose. "Do you need me to cooperate with anything?" "I want to establish an information channel here, encrypting information through the prismatic world. Help me watch for signs of information interruption and loss." "All right." By the way, Saul remembered the Wind Sprite's commission and relayed her previous words to Pearl. However, after hearing Saul's words, Pearl only said flatly, "Fine." Finally meeting Pearl again, she seemed to lack some emotions and desires. Even when talking with Saul earlier, she had a businesslike tone, no longer showing previous intimacy. After pleasantries, they began serious business. Saul's massive threads slowly extended and contracted, squeezing out two vague thread ends from within like pulling silk from a cocoon. These two threads connected to each other, constructing the basic form of a transmission formation in the middle. Then Saul covered them with mental power, replacing magic power as the energy source for the entire formation. Because many actions in the prismatic world could be completed with just a thought, Saul quickly built the entire encrypted transmission formation. Next, he needed to stabilize the entire formation and try communicating with Shea and Floco, corresponding to his two fate lines. However, as soon as he tried transmitting information, the formation made of threads suddenly dispersed. As if everything was a moon's reflection in water, with the slightest touch, it shattered completely. Such a clean failure. Saul began reviewing why it went wrong from the start. The constructed magical formation not being solid enough is the most important reason, because the formation material is my fate lines, essentially it's still. Am I too weak? Though he had only conducted one experiment, Saul understood the problem. But this problem was something he couldn't immediately solve now. To construct encrypted information channels in the prismatic world required at least fourth-rank power, but he was building information encryption channels now to lay the foundation for advancing to fourth rank. Good heavens! A dead loop. Pearl remained silent. If it were the previous her, she should have asked what trouble Saul encountered. Just as Saul was deep in thought about how to untangle this deadlock, another voice appeared in his mind. You want to construct an information channel. It was a death demon from the prismatic world. Saul didn't know how many death demons existed in this world, but the one speaking to him each time should be the same one. Yes, but my current power is too weak to construct channels at such a distance, Saul said with a bitter smile. At the same time, he held his breath, anticipating inwardly. Not disappointing Saul, or rather the death demon seemed to have already made a decision before speaking. This world is too turbulent. Your power cannot guarantee signal transmission. Yes, I discovered this point too, but I temporarily don't have any good solutions myself. Very simple. The death demon said lightly. I'll give you a stable space. As soon as the other's voice rang in Saul's consciousness, a huge circular platform suddenly appeared in the prismatic world. This circular platform looked gray and dull, not matching the prismatic world's color scheme. But its appearance was very familiar. The original lay quietly in Saul's consciousness space. The death demon had actually given Saul a safe zone in the prismatic world without a word. Chapter 851, The Prismatic Channel. The death demon, without any disagreement, allocated a safe zone for Saul within the prismatic time. When Saul arrived above the gray platform with his consciousness body wrapped in thread-like form, he suddenly transformed back into human appearance. Obviously, in this safe zone, he could move around more freely. Saul moved about and discovered that the environment here was very similar to the wizard world. Even the concentration of magical particles was about the same. As if with a mere gesture, a small world had been created. In such an environment, constructing a transmission formation for the information channel became much easier. Saul immediately redeployed his mental power, and following the already designed steps, used his fate lines to connect and create a second information transmission formation. After the formation was completed, he activated his mental power again. This time, he was even more careful and focused to avoid damaging the fate lines again. And this time, it went surprisingly smoothly. All formations and energy took shape in one go, and most importantly, the information exchange also returned feedback. What? The mental fluctuation belonging to Floco was translated into clear words within the formation. Saul smiled. Floco, can you hear my voice clearly? What Saul transmitted naturally wasn't sound, but mental power would be converted through the fate lines between the two to Floco's consciousness, and similarly be translated into common language. So, the information Floco transmitted carried undisguised surprise. It seemed that information directly transmitted through fate lines couldn't hide the original emotions of the transmitter. I can hear very clearly, is this the effect of that magic formation from last time? Floco knew that his ability to escape from the deep sea was because he had made a deal with Saul. After this deal, he and Saul had formed a community of interests. Even he himself could feel that his future seemed to be bound with Saul's. Although Saul couldn't interfere with his will and actions, if something went wrong on Saul's side, he would suffer severe backlash. While that backlash couldn't take his life, it would still severely damage his vitality. That's why Floco was willing to expend energy to possess the mermaid Kate and help Saul research mermaids. It's one of the functions of the Symphony of Fate. However, I just developed it and am still in the experimental stage. At this moment, another message came from a distant place. My God, what is this thing that got into my brain? Could it be that I've been cursed by someone? Or did someone plant some parasite in my brain without my knowledge? Damn it, do I need to dissect my brain to take a look? A familiar wave of paranoid delusion hit him head-on. The upward curve of Saul's mouth grew even higher. Shea, long time no see. Saul, so it's you. Well, you scared me. I thought I was being parasitized by someone again. Shea, who had been ready to crack open his own skull, finally put down the small knife in his hand. Probably having been completely tamed by Saul, when facing Saul, he finally stopped being suspicious and paranoid. Is this a communication method you created? It's really good. Just as Shea was about to continue praising Saul, he didn't expect that the formation Saul had designed hadn't yet implemented information filtering. In other words, the information he transmitted to the formation would also be received by Floco. And Floco had no intention of hiding his existence. Floco, Saul, who is this Shea? Shea, there's someone else here. Could it be that you've been parasitized by someone else, Saul? Saul held his forehead. No, I'm fine. This is a specially encrypted information transmission channel I established. This way, even if we three are separated by great distances, we can still communicate through this platform. After explaining the information transmission, Saul introduced the two to each other. The current situation is like this. There may be others joining this platform in the future. Let's call it the prismatic channel. If there are emergencies in the future, we can help each other. Everyone is now a community of interests to some degree. Remember to help each other. Prismatic channel, that sounds awful. Did this sentence get transmitted too? This channel is quite sensitive. Ha 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 ha. Ignoring Shea's embarrassed laughter, Saul pursed his lips and temporarily added a small isolation chamber to the formation, making it so Shea could only speak but not listen. Then he started discussing serious matters with Floco first. Lord Floco, Nefrit Continent is about to face a new round of Black Tide assault. According to reliable information, Everknight's defensive action against the Black Tide is very likely to encounter an accident this time. Floco immediately made an association. There's a problem with Everknight's mermaids. Saul was startled. Normally shouldn't one think there was a problem with Everknight's Red Sea trees? After all, Red Sea trees were the main force against the Black Tide. Mermaids were just there to clean up the battlefield. But Floco wasn't more concerned about mermaids just because he was of the Azure Scale clan. He immediately explained the reason for his guess. Floco, actually, the condition of Everknight's mermaids is somewhat strange. The mermaid who inherited the most royal bloodline has been kept in captivity. The mermaid with the second highest bloodline concentration has developed a disease that prevents contact with the Black Tide. This disease not only cannot be cured but also infects other mermaids. Saul also had this suspicion and nodded. Yes, I've noticed too. And a few days ago when I captured some atavistic mermaids for experiments, I discovered that these atavistic mermaids' resistance to the black tide wasn't as strong as other mermaids. It's as if the more atavistic they are, the weaker they become. But this isn't impossible either, since atavistic mermaids existed in an era when there was no black tide. But Saul, there's one thing you've forgotten. The deep sea has never been a safe place. The mermaid race that originated from the deep sea fought their way out of the most dangerous darkness. Floco's words immediately enlightened Saul. That's right. Mermaid royalty's physical constitution couldn't be inferior to other mermaids. In the law of the jungle and the deep sea, such mermaids couldn't possibly become royalty. If that's the case, why would atavistic mermaids appear so weak? Floco, probably because they have wizards pressing down on them. Saul thought of Pearl's deliberately damaged soul body, of Coral's careful probing when they first met. And during his deep-sea observations of the mermaid community, that fleeting special mental fluctuation. Could it be that the accident occurring at this masquerade ball was caused by mermaids? Not that Saul was arrogant, but based on his current understanding of mermaids, even if these creatures used all their cunning, they would find it very difficult to stir up any trouble before the tribunal. After all, they were absolutely suppressed in terms of strength. Unless they're not trying to rebel. They just want to escape. Taking advantage of the black tide's arrival to flee the Red Sea and break free from the tribunal's control. But with the tribunal watching over them, even if they wanted to run, it wouldn't be that easy. Floco Saul. Yes. Floco, if the mermaids want to escape, could you lend a hand? If the mermaids were all muddled and confused, then being controlled by the tribunal was just being controlled. Even if they escaped, they might not necessarily have any good ending. But if the mermaid race had this intention themselves, Floco still hoped to see a more independent and free mermaid race. Here it comes. Saul's eyes lit up, but he said, I'll definitely be watched closely by the tribunal, so I can't help. Before Floco could say anything, he continued, However, Lord Floco, would you like to come over and join the excitement? Chapter 852, The Black Tide Approaches. Shea, is anyone there? Did the signal cut out? Isn't this prismatic channel supposed to be quite sensitive? Why is it so unstable? Having just finished discussing serious matters with Floco, Saul heard Shea shouting from his isolation chamber. All right, I just had something to discuss with Floco. Now let's talk about you. How's your condition? Have you gained control of the inverted tree yet? Shea's voice was full of sighs. It hasn't been easy for me either. I was only first rank when I died, barely managed second rank with external help, and now I have to tame a third rank. Saul understood Shea's situation clearly. Being able to rest and recover peacefully within the inverted tree was already good enough. He wasn't in a rush to have him rise immediately. Of course, he couldn't be too idle either. Without ups and downs in fate, how could he provide Saul with sufficient power of fate? Anyway, Saul planned to find something for Shea to do once he adapted to the inverted tree's body. Shea, by the way, although I'm recovering now, I've also sent tree roots outside to scout the situation and discovered something. What is it? Shea, the Kema-Duchy seems to be in some chaos recently. The troops and wizards originally stationed outside Kaugust have almost all left. They looked grave, as if something major had happened. The troops were withdrawn. Could there be another war? The Kina's duchy is no longer a threat, so could it be another force invading? However, the Kema-Duchy didn't have such close ties with Saul, so naturally he wouldn't let the still-recovering Shea venture out to take risks. Good, if there's any situation around Kaugust, Help me keep watch, but don't leave Baton Academy. Don't affect your recovery." Shea was actually somewhat moved for a moment. Coming to his senses, he wondered why he was moved. Could it be that Saul had influenced his mind? Before Shea could think further, Saul had already disconnected the prismatic channel. His time in the prismatic world was limited now. With serious matters concluded, it was time to leave. When leaving, Saul bid farewell to Peyer again. "Goodbye." Peyer's voice carried more emotion than when they first met. "From now on, I probably won't return, and the next time you come, I might not appear either." Saul understood that surviving in the prismatic world wasn't easy for Peyer either. This place was somewhere she had to exert all her strength just to stay alive. But if she could establish a foothold here, the upper limits of this place were much higher than the wizard world. "I understand. I already have a platform space here, so I won't trouble you when I come in the future. You can focus on yourself." Although he couldn't see Peyer's appearance, Saul could still recall her flamboyant, yet somewhat foolish demeanor in the borderland. He sighed inwardly and finally said, "Goodbye." There was no response from the other side. Saul disconnected and returned to the wizard world. After Saul left, after an unknown amount of time, a soft goodbye finally drifted over. After Saul's consciousness returned to his temporary palace, he didn't think about Peyer anymore. Actually, he and Peyer couldn't even be called lovers. It was just that they both had crises to deal with at the time, and being together was more advantageous for both. Now that Peyer had survived her greatest death crisis and had other opportunities, Saul naturally wouldn't cling to her. This was also the norm in the wizard world. "Did anyone come looking for me?" Saul stood up and inquired of the wind sprite and Narella nearby. The wind sprite was too lazy to speak, while Narella was more diligent. "The servant who often comes by did come looking for you, but knocked on the door and left when you didn't respond." Saul knew it was Sander looking for him. These days he had been secluded, so if Sander had any matters, he could only send servants to find him. This also matched Sander's current slightly anxious state. It was time to see Sander. With this thought, Saul ended his seclusion of several days, left the palace, and took a carriage to meet the puppet emperor of Evernight. The preparations he needed to make were mostly complete. Next was helping Sander's sister Mido adapt to her new body. If his third target could take root smoothly after this black tide, then Sander and Mido would no longer be simple puppets. All parties were preparing intensively. The wizards responsible for monitoring the black tide's movements changed from reporting every 3 days to daily reports, and finally to hourly reports. The entire southeastern coastline of Nefrit continent had been assigned wizards for defense. These wizards had to fight against the sea monsters that came with the black tide. Every black tide assault was accompanied by severely polluted and mutated monsters, sometimes many, sometimes few, with no pattern. But the tribunal had to defend according to the highest standards every time. If monsters broke through the defense line and destroyed the Red Sea tree forest, allowing the black tide to reach shore, then Nefrit continent would be pulled toward the abyssal eye. Even if being breached once or twice didn't matter, no one dared gamble the continent's future on the consequences of a single oversight. On the day the black tide officially appeared within the defense warning line, as expected, no one assigned Saul any tasks. Saul had originally been invited to treat mermaids. Although he hadn't solved the fundamental problem yet, the Evernight royal family had been treating him well, never short on magical materials and magic crystals. Saul didn't need to consume his own supplies at all. However, if Saul wanted to go to the defense line to help, the people of Evernight would only welcome him. After all, he was a third-rank wizard, and a third-rank wizard powerful enough to single-handedly seal a storm eye. Even if he could only help in one defense area, It would make people feel more at ease. And Saul had long decided to make an appearance on the battlefield today. Before departing, he first went to see Sander and handed over the black tree branch he had been nurturing for a long time. Mido is inside now, but she'll definitely need a few more days to adapt well. Spend more time with her and don't let her be afraid. Sander carefully received the tree branch, remembering how before Mido entered the black tree branch, he had often seen Saul casually spinning this branch up and down with one hand. 2 days ago, when Mido was moved into the branch by Saul, he wondered if she had gotten dizzy from all the spinning these past days. Sander only worried inwardly but didn't show it outwardly. Whether Saul's actions were habitual or had other purposes, it wasn't his place to question. He wasn't a wizard. He could only be useful to wizards to maintain his position as emperor. Saul wasn't worried about handing over the black tree branch. Now Mido looked like just a bare tree branch, but as long as she wanted to move, she could instantly grow into a towering tree. It just wasn't necessary right now. Saul left the Evernight royal palace and went straight to the seaside. He had asked beforehand where the Black Flame Emperor was located and chose the corresponding defense area without any hesitation. Near the coast, the sky was different from inland. Although there were clouds above the palace, at least you could tell it was daytime. The closer to the seaside, the thicker and darker the cloud layer became. Upon reaching a high ground by the sea and looking into the distance, the sky was completely gray-black, with sunlight completely blocked. The heavy cloud layer rolled and surged, as if countless worms and snakes were hidden inside, twisting and climbing, ready to burst through the clouds at any moment. The sea below the clouds was also rendered lifeless, with no turbulent waves visible. Before great waves came, the seawater was unusually calm, even receding beyond the perimeter of the Red Sea trees. The Red Sea tree groves that normally sparkled like gems under sunlight now appeared as menacing as if stained with blood. "The black tide is coming," Saul said softly, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile calm before his eyes. Chapter 853, Coastal Defense Formation. There was no wind by the sea. This was very abnormal. But as Saul swept his gaze forward, he saw that the originally rocky shore had been arranged with ring upon ring of magic formation using special powders. Looking across the entire visible coastline, there could be hundreds of such formations. Individual formations weren't complex, just ordinary air barrier formations. But when hundreds of formations combined together, they were enough to turn the originally breezy coastline into a completely windless sea area. Forbidding wind by the sea, such a grand undertaking. News of Saul coming to participate in the defense had already reached the ears of the wizards in the defense zone. Not long after he arrived, he saw Royer flying over and landing beside him. "Haha, Saul, I didn't expect you to come. These past few days I saw you staying secluded. I thought you planned to keep experimenting until the black tide receded." Saul knew that the black tide assault wasn't a matter of just 1 or 2 days. He glanced around at the various wizards all in battle formation, thinking that the masquerade ball warned about in his diary probably wouldn't happen at this time. But he still came, just in case. "I was experimenting and lost track of time, then remembered that recently seemed to be the time when the black tide assault was reported. How is it? Am I not late?" Royer looked very happy, patting Saul's shoulder. "Of course not, but the first wave of black tide is about to arrive. No matter what, I appreciate you coming. Follow me in action later." The words spoke of appreciation, but since Saul had come to the coast, Royer couldn't let him act freely on his own. Having Saul follow him was best. He could keep an eye on him while also letting Saul truly contribute to resisting the black tide. Saul understood this in his heart, but there was no need to point it out. All right, but what do we need to do? Do we need to prepare? I'm responsible for several nearby defense zones. Whenever a third-rank monster appears in any defense zone, or the defense line is in crisis, I go there. Saul understood it was a fire brigade. He casually asked, "What about Alfonso? Is he responsible for another area?" "Not exactly. Now all the third-rank wizards from the tribunal who were abroad have returned. We're dividing the entire southeastern coastline equally, but he's still responsible for watching over the mermaids." Royer raised his hand and pointed toward the sea ahead. "Look, he's over there." Alfonso should be underwater at this moment. Saul couldn't see him, but there were faint familiar mental power fluctuations coming through. Just being far away, he couldn't be completely certain. Since Royer said Alfonso was over there, the mental power Saul sensed should be his. At a time like this, why is he still underwater watching the mermaids? Weren't the atavistic mermaids who might be infected with the pollution disease basically all isolated separately? Royer shrugged. Most of them, but although mermaids are just garbage cleaners for pollution, it's still best not to have incidents at this time. When saying this, Saul felt Royer's tone was somewhat cold. Having already seen Royer's end, Saul vaguely understood what Royer was unhappy about. Now wasn't the time for him to act yet. During their conversation, the already windless coast suddenly became even more quiet. From the pitch-black sky and sea in the distance, a deeper black shadow suddenly emerged. That shadow started as a line, then gradually widened and grew larger, becoming a black curtain connecting heaven and earth. Saul couldn't help but hold his breath. That black curtain was completely silent, not accompanied by lightning and thunder, yet it gave people a despairing and power-stripping sense of intimidation. As if the world began disappearing from that black line onward, and the places swept by that black line all seemed to be annihilated into dust. Saul knew that everything just now was merely his imagination, his awe toward seeing for the first time a terrifying celestial phenomenon capable of destroying an entire continent. The black tide was different from the storm eye in the borderland. The black tide that appeared in the borderland storm eye was like water gushing out when a dam burst. Although it was also imposing, it wasn't like the black tide sweeping across an entire ocean before his eyes, like a tsunami that blocks out the sun and sky, making people despair just by looking at it. However, Saul wasn't someone who would be intimidated by celestial phenomena. After all, he had once faced the death demon of the prismatic world directly. The death demon couldn't just be considered a terrifying phenomenon, more like a celestial phenomenon. While Saul quietly watched the black tide approaching, Royer was also carefully observing him, discovering that when Saul faced the black tide for the first time, although he was also shocked, he didn't show the panic that many people displayed when seeing the black tide for the first time. This made Royer approve of Saul even more. Now isn't the time for us to take the stage yet. After the first wave of black tide arrives and those monsters appear, that's when we act. Despite saying this, Royer still flew up into the high sky, with Saul following closely behind. Above their heads were heavy cloud layers. The two were in midair, at nearly the highest point. However, they weren't the most powerful wizards in the vicinity. In the sea area ahead of them, a figure suddenly appeared standing in the high sky. At the same time, a powerful mental pressure nearly covered the entire Red Sea area. All other wizards wore similar wizard robes, but he still wore a black formal suit with starlight faintly glimmering at the hem. That was the Emperor of the Black Flame Empire, fourth-rank Wizard Alo. The people present didn't bow to His Majesty Alo. With the black tide at hand, it wasn't time for ceremony. But even so, the nearby wizards couldn't help but glance at the Black Flame Emperor. The other party was a fourth-rank wizard. Just standing there gave everyone endless support. Only Saul's eyes moved slightly, remembering seeing Stuart disguised as Emperor Elo a few days ago, wondering in his heart whether the person before him was really Emperor Elo himself. Although Emperor Elo had just released mental pressure sufficient to suppress the entire coastline, it was also possible he used some special and powerful magical tool. However, today was only the first day of responding to the black tide. The ball hadn't started yet, so the person here might indeed be the real Black Flame Emperor. Saul looked around. Lord Frym isn't on this side. This coastline was the most prominent cape along the entire southeastern coast, also the place bearing the greatest pressure from the black tide. If the tribunal chief wasn't here, where else could he be? Royer kept his eyes on the front but still answered Saul's question. The chief rarely appears in defense zones. He has to control the defense formations of the entire coastline. He can't leave the formation's core area for long periods, or this defense formation would stop operating. If there really is a problem that no one present can solve, even if it means temporarily stopping the formation, the chief would still act. There was one such instance before. Royer showed a bitter smile, but other places suffered many wizard casualties because the formation stopped. At this moment, the first black wave was already close at hand. Everyone looked up, watching the black tide that seemed to descend from the sky. Boom! The great wave crashed down, carrying the terrifying momentum of devastating everything and destroying heaven and earth. Suddenly, a white barrier covering the entire coastline appeared behind everyone, suddenly emitting brilliant light. Like a blazing sun rising behind them. The black tide that had just been so imposing suddenly slowed down, and the terrifying pressure also dissipated somewhat. Is this the defense formation that the tribunal laid across the entire coastline? Saul was startled. No wonder it needs a fourth rank to constantly oversee it. Chapter 854, Black Tide Monsters. The black tide, hundreds of meters high, came crashing down. The wizards standing in front of the defense formation all glowed with various colored lights. Although they had the defense formation behind them, they each had to resist the powerful kinetic energy of the black tide and the polluting force it carried. Saul was among them, but together with Royer, he was in a relatively rear position. This position also allowed him to take in the surrounding situation. Watching the wizards in front being swallowed by the black tide, Saul frowned slightly, though judging by everyone's performance, they should be accustomed to such impacts. Although Saul's reaction was slower than others, the defensive formation he released was completed first. A circle of light shields with electric arcs surrounded Saul's entire body, and then the next second, seemingly endless black seawater swallowed him. The protective formation behind them greatly weakened the power of the black tide, but being immersed in it still made Saul feel real pressure. Even he, a third-rank wizard, felt this way, not to mention how difficult it was for other lower-rank wizards. Fortunately, after this huge wave passed, the pressure brought by the black tide was completely and solidly received. When it entered the Red Sea behind them, it would no longer cause damage to the Red Sea trees. As the black tide continued surging toward the coast, it was all absorbed by the Red Sea trees that had been rooted there for many years. The densely packed red leaves were like countless hungry little mouths, absorbing the pollution sources that had surged in the seawater one by one. After being filtered once by the network formed by the Red Sea tree forest, the remaining waves that reached the shore were insufficient to cause fundamental harm to the entire continent. Seeing the great wave blocked as expected, Royer felt more composed. He glanced below at the Red Sea trees and introduced to Saul. As for this black tide, the scale is considered medium among previous years. If nothing unexpected happens, the defensive battle can end in 3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days. We're fine, but can those lower-rank wizards below hold out? Regarding his tribunal colleagues, Royer wasn't as cold-blooded as when facing mermaids, but he didn't have any better methods either. Every black tide has advance warning, and they all try their best to prepare. If they still can't hold out under these circumstances, then even the tribunal has no solution. Casualties were definitely inevitable, and Royer's job was to handle the enemies when a defense zone suffered casualties beyond its capacity, giving the lower-rank wizards a chance to catch their breath and recover. But the Black Tide assault would continue for several days. Royer also had to calculate his strength when acting. Otherwise, if people couldn't hold on in the later stages while he was powerless to help, that would be dangerous. After the first black tide swept through, it wasn't long before the second arrived. After everyone persisted through the second black tide, shadows of monsters finally appeared in the third wave. Saul finally saw the appearance of the famous black tide mutated monsters. The monsters emerging from the black tide were mainly fish-shaped. Only each fish was alarmingly large. Their bodies were mostly rotting, exposing stark white bones and internal organs and flesh that had turned black and hardened. These monsters showed no intelligence in their eyes, only fierce destructive desire. Obviously, these monsters' individual strength wasn't particularly impressive, but they lacked wisdom and wouldn't retreat even when facing high-rank wizards. These monster fish ranged from 5 meters to over 20 meters in length. Combined with their considerable numbers and being carried forward by the tall waves, they made people feel a chill. Before everyone could adapt to the icy chill, a foul stench followed. It was like corpses that had rotted for many days, accompanied by a fishy sea smell that made people nauseous. A wizard apprentice who wasn't very old, seemingly in his first battle, accidentally inhaled a mouthful of the stench and immediately bent over to vomit. As he vomited, what came out of his mouth turned into sticky blood clots. Then he vomited some strange hard objects. This wizard apprentice was standing on a platform created by the official wizard beside him. Bending over and vomiting like this, he actually became unsteady and fell headfirst into the sea. During this time, that true wizard and the other wizard apprentices he led were all resisting the poisonous gas and had no time to help him, only able to watch helplessly as he fell. The apprentice who fell into the sea had no protection from an official wizard and couldn't resist the pollution in the seawater at all. His body began swelling as soon as it touched the seawater, like bread put into an oven. In just a few breaths, his entire appearance was unrecognizable, his volume 5 or 6 times the original size. This apprentice became the first casualty of this defensive battle. HMPH, we tell them the precautions every time, but every time there are idiots who can't remember. Forget it, just a wizard apprentice. If he dies, he dies. Royer was somewhat angry. Saul stood quietly beside him, also noticing that wizard apprentice. The other's corpse didn't float on the sea surface for long before being pulled down by some unknown creature and completely disappearing. After the first death, new casualties soon appeared. However, these people at least weren't killed by poisonous gas. The wizards at the very front had already engaged with the monsters in the black tide. It was just that these monsters were unafraid of death, slippery to handle, and carried their own poisonous gas. Even some official wizards were flustered when facing them. Not to mention the apprentices, who had originally come to do auxiliary work. But this batch of apprentices was luckier than previous years. They now had 2 third-rank wizards stationed behind them, so this mission should be easier to complete. Saul didn't idle on his first day either. After seeing Royer act to help 2 wizards kill the monsters besieging them, Saul also took action. Wherever he saw teams under greater pressure, he would step forward and sweep monsters with his soul blades. Perhaps because the monsters appearing on the first day weren't very powerful, Saul could kill a large area with one strike, greatly reducing the pressure on lower-rank wizards. Seeing this, Royer gave Saul a thumbs up. Actually, both Royer and Saul were very strong among third-rank wizards. Having two people responsible for one area was indeed somewhat wasteful. But Royer currently didn't feel comfortable letting Saul wander around outside alone, so he could only arrange it this way. By afternoon, it was the usual low tide time. The black tide waters receded wave by wave, with monsters and dead bodies returning to the deep sea with the seawater. "We can rest for a while now." Royer showed no fatigue on his face, even smiling broadly because few people had died in the area he was responsible for today. "There will be another round of high tide at night, but the scale won't be as large as during the day. However, starting tomorrow, more powerful deep-sea mutated monsters will appear. So whenever there's time, you must meditate quickly to recover mental power and magic power." Although third-rank wizards could absorb external magic power, this place was a coast invaded by black tide pollution, so rashly absorbing external magic power was also dangerous. Moreover, with so many third-rank wizards here, everyone absorbing together could drain this area's magic power dry. That would make it even more dangerous for others. Saul retreated to the cliff and sat down to prepare for meditation. But he saw Royer about to take off again. "I'm going into the sea to check on Alfonso's situation." Chapter 855, The Seabed. Going to the seabed, Saul quickly followed. "I'll go take a look too." Royer gave Saul a meaningful look. "The pollution levels underwater are seriously over the limit right now. Are you sure you want to go?" Saul insisted, just in case, to adapt in advance to being pulled underwater. This wasn't wrong, but would the other really continue fighting in such dangerous circumstances? However, since Saul had said so, he couldn't refuse. Alfonso's location wasn't a secret place anyway. It's just that now, probably no one else besides him could stay in the sea for such a long time. The two transformed into black shadows and dove headfirst into the surging dark blue-black waves. Underwater, the visibility was even lower. The intertwined roots and branches were like a maze. Saul and Royer didn't rely on sight, but swam toward the seabed following Alfonso's mental power emanations. After considerable effort, they finally swam out of the densest area of underwater branches. The view ahead became much more open. Although it was still completely dark, Saul could already sense, like during his last dive, the layers upon layers of mermaids lying on the seabed. These mermaids were in worse condition than he had seen last time. They were listless, as if half asleep. No wonder, although their resistance to the black tide far exceeded ordinary people and wizard apprentices, they weren't completely unaffected. Now, due to the black tide assault, the pollution index in the seawater had reached a dangerous threshold, and these mermaids were also significantly affected. They wouldn't die immediately, but they were definitely very uncomfortable. It's just that no one cared whether they were uncomfortable or not. After swimming down several dozen more meters, Saul finally discovered Alfonso. He was currently standing in a magic formation. Sensing Saul and Royer's approach, he actively emerged from the formation. "Why did you come over?" Alfonso's voice rang in their minds. Since it was one-on-one voice transmission, Saul couldn't hear what Royer and Alfonso said. He only saw Alfonso nod silently. "I came to see the underwater situation." Facing Alfonso, Saul didn't give such high-sounding reasons. After Alfonso finished communicating with Royer, he turned to Saul and said, "The formation I'm in here is a concealment formation. When monsters attacked the wizards on the surface just now, there were actually wandering monsters underwater too. It's just that the strong magical power fluctuations from wizards on the surface attract their attention more. If in the later stages, monsters aren't cleared in time and their numbers keep increasing, you might really need to enter underwater combat." So they really would need to fight underwater. However, that should be due to monsters on the surface not being cleared in time. So was the death of Royer, and the other two third-rank wizards related to this. Could it be that powerful monsters appeared underwater, or the numbers exceeded expectations, causing everyone to be caught off guard? But with two fourth-rank wizards present, it shouldn't have led to the death of 3 people. Moreover, Saul hadn't completely figured out what everyone's masks specifically were. He only had some guesses. I'm not afraid of underwater combat. Saul had also fought in the Black Tide before. Whether in his octopus tentacle form or pitch-black skeleton form, both were suitable for sea combat. He looked at the surrounding mermaids. These mermaids are in such poor condition. Could something go wrong? The mermaids lived behind the defense line. As long as the defense line didn't break, both the Red Sea trees and they wouldn't be attacked by monsters. But the defense line couldn't block pollution. That's why Alfonso needed to monitor the mermaid's situation underwater. If the tribunal managed to withstand the Black Tide assault, but the mermaids couldn't process the pollution absorbed by the Red Sea tree forest after the Black Tide ended, then the tribunal would face a new round of pollution crisis. Alfonso's voice was very calm. There's no problem. These mermaids aren't facing a Black Tide assault for the first time either. Although they look like they're in poor condition now, this is exactly why they'll be more aggressive in feeding after the Black Tide passes. His voice paused briefly, then continued. It's just that after every feeding frenzy, large numbers of mermaids die. So we also need to conduct artificial breeding afterward. Artificial breeding meant the entire process from mermaid mating to juvenile maturation, ensuring that mermaid numbers would recover to normal in the shortest time. Saul had seen such methods in some settlements in the borderland. His first apprentice Noah had been artificially matured this way, resulting in his body being allergic to magical power. If he hadn't been left in the Chaos Realm by Saul, he would probably already be counting his final moments. Having roughly understood the underwater situation, Royer was ready to go back. Saul actually wanted to stay underwater a bit longer. Last time he had encountered a special mental power fluctuation underwater. He wondered if that special mental power would still appear now that the Black Tide had arrived. But neither Royer nor Alfonso recommended that Saul stay underwater long-term. Alfonso could remain mainly because the tribunal had prepared a concealment formation for him. As long as he stayed within this formation, he could enjoy the protection of the defense formation without expending his own energy to deal with the Black Tide pollution in the seawater. But this concealment formation could only work for one person. With major battles still ahead, Royer naturally couldn't let Saul, this voluntary labor force, waste energy on other unnecessary matters. Returning to the surface, Saul could already sense Alfonso's mental power from the seabed. It seemed the concealment formation was designed for sea monsters and wasn't completely hidden from wizards like Saul. Through this weak but stable mental power, one could also confirm that Alfonso underwater was completely normal. Royer and Saul returned to shore and seized the time to begin meditation, recovering magical power as much as possible and stabilizing mental power. At midnight, the second wave of Black Tide indeed arrived. This time, the number of monsters carried by the Black Tide was also somewhat higher than the first time. The wizards on shore could still cope, but more apprentice casualties occurred. Other wizard apprentices immediately filled their positions, not daring to say anything and continuing the work of those who had died. If anyone dared to flee during the resistance against the Black Tide, what awaited them would be a judgment order, the kind that meant death without rest. No deaths had occurred among the true wizards yet, but if the battle situation continued to intensify, death was just a matter of time. It's just that every wizard facing the Black Tide understood this point. Yet they all expressionlessly accepted their fate without any resistance. The first day passed in this intense, yet strangely calm atmosphere. By dawn, the afterwaves of the second black tide had already receded. Most people returned to shore to meditate and rest, leaving only a few to take turns monitoring the seaside situation. As an external member, Saul naturally didn't need to take shifts, but after recovering his magical power, he still returned to the sea surface at the first opportunity. Starting from the second day, the black tide scale would be larger, the attacking mutated monsters more numerous, and unexpected situations could arise at any time. Saul had to stay on the front lines to ensure he wouldn't miss the show. At the same time, he also glanced at Black Flame Emperor low ahead. Yesterday, he had hardly taken action all day. When most people were resting in the early morning, he had briefly left and had just returned. So, was the current Black Flame Emperor still the real Black Flame Emperor? Chapter 856, Calm Waters. Perhaps due to having the additional reinforcements of the Black Flame Emperor and Saul, casualties had been kept well under control. Although there were deaths among true wizards, the death toll hadn't reached the warning line, and the apprentices hadn't even used up all their reserves. Therefore, Royer's face had regained some smiles, and he could joke around with Saul. Looks like this black tide is still just a baby. I just don't know how much preparation time the next black tide will give us, 1 year or 5 years. Saul didn't respond. Before getting off work, he was cautious about discussing busy issues. During this period, Alfonso had hardly left the seabed, but his mental power fluctuations remained stable without any changes. This meant the underwater situation was under control. But even so, Royer would still go underwater for a round every day, as if afraid that Alfonso might encounter some unexpected situation alone. Starting from the fourth day, the new wave of black tide showed signs of weakening. Even the monsters in the sea weren't as dense as they had been initially. Saul had also sustained some minor injuries during these days of fighting. This was mainly because, on the third day, there were particularly many mutated monsters simultaneously attacking the defense zones. At that time, Royer was already tied up in one defense zone, but another was being attacked by 2 third-rank mutated monsters and could barely hold out for even a minute. Saul fought his way through the tide of monsters all the way to the most remote defense zone, then withstood the attacks of 1 third-rank monster, while concentrating firepower to eliminate the other third-rank monster first, before turning around and using his tentacles to directly drain the remaining third-rank mutated monster, thus preventing all the official wizards in that defense zone from being wiped out. He sustained some minor injuries on his back, and the wizard robe inscribed with defensive formations was also half torn. However, although Saul's rescue was timely, under the assault of 2 third-rank equivalent mutated monsters, the entire defense zone still had only 1 true wizard left. In this small defense zone section, all wizard apprentices had died the moment they directly faced the third-rank monsters. The sole remaining true wizard, following the tribunal's arrangements, automatically merged into the rear defense zone, completely abandoning the frontmost small group defense zone. It seemed that Saul hadn't been able to change the result of losing a defense zone, but the person he saved was a second-rank wizard, which still had a very significant impact. After resolving this small crisis, Saul returned along his route, also helping to clear many monsters along the way. By the time he returned to Royer's side, even the wounds on his back had completely healed. Now, seeing that the battle was about to end, with both the number of monsters and the height of the black tide diminishing, Saul finally returned to shore and breathed a long sigh of relief. At the same time, he habitually glanced at the sea surface. Alfonso's mental power remained stable. Is this about to end? Saul thought silently to himself. Could my understanding of the diary be wrong? The cause and occasion of the 3 third-ranks deaths isn't the Black Tide defense battle. He looked up and saw Black Flame Emperor Alo again. Since no major crises had appeared these past few days, this emperor hadn't formally taken action either, continuously monitoring the overall situation. At this moment, Royer suddenly returned to shore as well. "Saul, you've worked hard these days. The tide is starting to recede now. The battle is basically over with only some cleanup work remaining. You don't need to work hard anymore. You can go back now." Saul's heart suddenly jumped. Could it be that the masks' revel actually occurs when the ball ends? Right, only when the masquerade ball ends is it time for the dancers to remove their masks. Saul's spirits lifted. Now he definitely couldn't leave. "Since I'm already here, I'll stick it out to the end." Saul shook his head. Royer looked at Saul, then suddenly changed his tune. "Then fine with you here, these wizards feel more at ease." During Saul's time here, besides killing monsters, he would occasionally save wizards who weren't completely dead. Once wizards in the defense zones suffered heavy damage, they would be dragged toward the deep seawater by monsters. With their defenses shattered, they would immediately be polluted upon entering the Black Tide. Powerful wizards could still escape, but the pollution on their bodies was enough to make them lose all combat effectiveness, becoming lambs for slaughter. Saul mainly treated these people. He only specialized in treating Black Tide pollution, and the people here most needed treatment for Black Tide pollution. Therefore, after 4 days of combat and treatment experience, Saul's reputation within the entire tribunal had reached heights that even their local third-rank wizards could hardly achieve. He was almost on par with Royer and Alfonso. So when Royer said other wizards felt more at ease, it wasn't empty words. However, after praising Saul, he added, "Then I'll leave this place to you. When the Black Tide completely ends, the tribunal will double the compensation for any materials you've consumed. Next, I need to go check on the major defense zones that other third-rank wizards are responsible for. Anyway, with Emperor Alo here, even if something happens elsewhere, nothing could possibly happen here." Royer laughed heartily, and without waiting for Saul to speak, directly transformed into a streak of fire and flew along the coast toward the distance. Saul was completely bewildered by the other's sudden operation. How is it that when I don't go back, Royer leaves instead? He's leaving at the final moment. Could he be going to remove his mask? Saul breathed the foul-smelling air, his heart relatively calm. He looked at the Black Flame Emperor ahead, then at Alfonso's stable mental power coming from the sea surface, thinking it doesn't matter. One ran away, but there are still 2 left. If I really can't participate in the masquerade ball described in the diary, I can also have Mido come out after the Black Tide ends. At that time, with Nefrit lacking 3 heavyweight third-rank wizards, Mido's appearance would be timely rain. If Sander operates well afterward, he should be able to establish a firm foothold. Having already prepared backup plans, Saul wasn't anxious about Royer's sudden departure and continued monitoring the situation in the defense zone that Royer had originally been responsible for. Just then, his gaze unconsciously moved toward the seawater below the Red Sea tree forest. Royer today seems like he didn't go underwater to check on Alfonso's situation. He went every day before, so why didn't he go today? Saul's brow furrowed bit by bit. Is it because he felt there was no need to check today? His gaze moved to the Black Flame Emperor again, and his eyes suddenly widened. The Black Flame Emperor before me is very likely Stuart in disguise. So is the mental power coming from the seabed definitely from the real Alfonso. When Royer was making his rounds before, Alfonso was definitely there, but this time Royer isn't checking. Does this mean Royer knows? Alfonso isn't there. Saul's brow gradually relaxed. He swept across the entire defense zone again, then suddenly took off from the cliff and dove into the sea surface like a cannonball. Having been led once by Royer, this time Saul had no trouble finding Alfonso's location on his own. At this moment, Saul saw Alfonso still standing in the magic formation, focused on observing the mermaids scattered across the seafloor. Saul quickly approached Alfonso, but stopped halfway there. For no other reason than at this distance, with Saul's powerful mental power, he could already sense the abnormality of the Alfonso before him. The Alfonso before him was a completely fake mirror image. The real Alfonso had long since left the formation, but his mental power continued to steadily broadcast toward the sea surface, creating the illusion that he was still on the seabed. This fake mirror image would be Alfonso's mask. Now he has already removed his mask. That is to say, his death is approaching. Chapter 857. Farewell, Mr. Blackfish. After confirming that the Alfonso on the seabed was a mirror image, Saul immediately noticed the special nature of the surrounding environment. There were faint magical power fluctuations in the sea area around Alfonso. It was just that, with fighting still ongoing above, such magical fluctuations weren't conspicuous at all. But Saul believed that as long as he got a bit closer to Alfonso, he would be trapped by the measures the other had set up. Escaping would probably take some time, but injury or death wouldn't happen, since Alfonso wouldn't believe that with just one mirror image, he could kill another third-rank wizard. If it weren't for Alfonso still underestimating Saul's mental power, and Saul discovering before entering Alfonso's trap that what stood in the formation was not a real person, Saul might really have wasted some time here. Seeing the situation clearly, Saul didn't bother to investigate Alfonso's arrangements in detail. He directly made a turn and flew toward the sea surface. Now 2 third ranks had already left the coast, leaving him with one remaining target. A mask that can't be removed. Does this mean Stuart will die in the name of the Black Flame Emperor? Alfonso had left at some unknown time, and Royer claimed to be patrolling other areas. These two had already gone far, and Saul had nowhere to pursue them, so he might as well watch the person before him. Moreover, most crucially, Saul's third target also needed to be born in this place. At the deep water pool by the seaside. This place had once imprisoned dozens of atavistic mermaids, with specialized wizards secretly watching over them daily. But in the past 2 days, with the Black Tide assault, to ensure the front defense line didn't fall, the wizards here had also been transferred, leaving only restraining formations to prevent the mermaids from escaping. This restraining formation could not only seal the deep water pool, but also provide warnings when outsiders violently damaged the formation. But if the formation seal was opened using the correct method, this formation wouldn't give any warning. Simply put, inside jobs are hard to guard against. When the Black Tide's power was waning but still occupied most people's attention, this deep water pool was already empty. The mermaids who should have been in the deep water pool were now being led by a person wearing black robes and shrouded in black mist, walking through narrow passages carved into a cliff face. Mermaids had no legs. Although they could barely walk on land, they crawled using their tails like snakes. Fortunately, mermaid scales were quite sturdy, so they wouldn't shed or get injured from excessive wear. But mermaids were, after all, a group that lived in water for extended periods. On their escape route, they still encountered various difficulties, both anticipated and unexpected. Mr. Blackfish. The mermaid Aqua, who originally had long blue hair, had now cut his beautiful locks to 2 fingers' length, looking quite comical. But no mermaid in this group would laugh at him, because all the other mermaids looked the same, including Coral, who had once amazed Saul. Mr. Blackfish, Aqua called again. Mr. Blackfish, who was walking at the front shrouded in black mist, finally turned around. "What is it?" His voice was very low, seeming to be in a bad mood, but the lowness carried determination. Sister's tail is starting to bleed. We need water. Coral's already damaged tail now had several wounds torn open, currently oozing blood. It's too dry here, another mermaid supporting Coral said. Our skin is already starting to crack. If this continues, we'll bleed too. But Mr. Blackfish only shook his head. If you want to leave this place, don't have any association with water. There's ocean nearby, underground currents, springs, but why don't I take you through water routes? It's because they think mermaids can't stay away from water for too long. Only by avoiding water routes can we not be caught up with. Mr. Blackfish had actually said this twice already. The dozens of atavistic mermaids behind him didn't really have only 7-second memories. Rather, in their panic, they needed to confirm again and again that their current escape route was correct and their choice was fine, so they could persist in this extremely dry place, crawling with difficulty using their tails. But Aqua, looking at the weak Coral, couldn't help but quicken his pace to get beside Mr. Blackfish. He said quietly, "Sir, Sister's injuries are too severe. Can I just use a small handful of water to moisten her wounds?" Mr. Blackfish turned his head and also spoke very quietly. "Aqua, do you still remember what I once told you?" Aqua was startled and tried hard to recall. "No matter what happens, leave according to the plan." Before finishing, he suddenly stopped, seeming to realize what these words meant. But realizing didn't mean he could understand. You want me to abandon my sister." In his excitement, he forgot to lower his voice and didn't even use honorifics when addressing Mr. Blackfish. Strangely, Coral, who was not far behind them and clearly heard Aqua's words, remained completely calm and said nothing. Aqua hadn't yet noticed the calmness of the person behind him. He only noticed Mr. Blackfish's silence. So he tried hard to speak up for his sister. "Mr. Blackfish, it was my sister who first cooperated by taking the potion you made, contracting that terrible pollution disease, which allowed experiments on atavistic mermaids to be suspended and made it so atavistic mermaids were no longer strictly guarded." Seeing such an agitated Aqua, Mr. Blackfish said nothing, only silently continued forward without a moment's delay. During the time Aqua was speaking, he had already fallen several meters behind Mr. Blackfish. He hurriedly caught up again, but saw Mr. Blackfish suddenly turn back and glance at him. Those eyes carried coldness, as if he didn't care what he wanted to say. Because of Aqua's concealment talent, he had always been a very special existence among the atavistic mermaids. Many tasks of exploration, observation, and information transmission could only be done by him without being discovered. So normally, other mermaids would take him as their leader and value his safety most. Even sacrificing other mermaids, they would protect him from being discovered. But today, on the escape route, Aqua suddenly realized that perhaps in Mr. Blackfish's heart, he wasn't the most important mermaid. Or maybe just important, but he had no voice in the decision-making. But Aqua didn't want to give up. He could abandon anyone else but not Coral. However, before Aqua, who was catching up to Mr. Blackfish, could speak again, Mr. Blackfish ahead suddenly stopped. Aqua nearly crashed into him. The leading Blackfish stared intently ahead, where there was clearly no one, but there were footprints on the ground. Aqua followed Mr. Blackfish's gaze and also saw the footprints. He immediately shut his mouth and stopped disturbing Mr. Blackfish. Flames suddenly ignited around the footprints, and the flames seemed to have their own life and autonomous consciousness, spreading to Mr. Blackfish's feet. "Wizard!" Aqua's eyes suddenly widened. Fear that had seeped into his bloodline made him involuntarily start trembling. He could only place all his hope on Mr. Blackfish in front of him. Blackfish remained motionless until the flames spread before him, then suddenly released a black smoke that directly extinguished the flames. However, after the flames were extinguished, they suddenly erupted with a loud explosion. Heat waves, like facing molten lava, rushed toward Blackfish, directly vaporizing the black robe on his body, revealing the man hiding inside the black robe, and the unconscious mermaid the man was tightly holding in his arms. Chapter 858. A race more adapted to the black tide. Facing the flame attack, Aqua instinctively dodged, but all attacks were blocked by Blackfish alone. When Aqua came to his senses, Blackfish's outer robe had already disappeared, revealing his appearance. The exposed Mr. Blackfish no longer had a black-scaled fish tail on his lower body, but a pair of normal legs. But what surprised Aqua wasn't the other's disappeared fish tail, but his appearance. He looked exactly like the wizard who experimented on mermaids. No, Aqua shook his head with a bitter smile in his heart. It wasn't just looking exactly alike. The other was clearly Alfonso. And the unconscious mermaid Alfonso held in his arms was none other than the mermaid princess, with the highest bloodline concentration among their atavistic mermaids, Pearl. The other mermaids behind them couldn't see Alfonso's face due to distance and angle, but they all recognized Pearl. If it weren't for the apparent enemy in front of them, they would probably have rushed forward. Aqua's already not too bright brain was in chaos. He couldn't understand how Mr. Blackfish, who had been secretly helping them restore their soul bodies and designing escape plans, had turned out to be the tribunal's third-rank wizard Alfonso. But the situation before him didn't allow Aqua to think too much. He gritted his teeth and decided to continue trusting Mr. Blackfish. No matter what, Mr. Blackfish had been helping them all along, and they had nothing worth being used for anyway. Although Alfonso's appearance was exposed, he wasn't panicked. He even tightened his hold on the mermaid in his arms, making Pearl more comfortable. "You came." His voice remained low and determined, as if he hadn't just been attacked. The footprints across from him suddenly materialized into a body from bottom to top, like an invisible person, revealing their true form. The newcomer was indeed Royer, who had just bid farewell to Saul and claimed to be going to patrol other areas. Compared to Alfonso's calmness, Royer had a cold face, his gaze seemingly capable of killing. "You still took this step." Royer's voice suppressed anger. "I don't understand why you insist on releasing this group of trash. Looking at you like this, you already guessed I would follow you, so why did you still take the atavistic mermaids to escape?" Unlike the agitated Royer, Alfonso looked completely calm, even appearing somewhat innocent. "Then why are you so fixated on these dozens of atavistic mermaids?" HMPH. No matter what mermaids they are, they're all tribunal assets and they must stay to clean pollution for the Red Sea trees. The tribunal has enough mermaids already. We're not short on these dozens. Whether we're short or not is for me to decide. I'm the one responsible for the Red Sea trees. Royer's voice was somewhat loud. Then, seeming to realize his emotions were too agitated, he calmed down for a moment before saying, "I don't care why you're trying to release mermaids when you know it's impossible, but since I'm here, you're coming back with me. This isn't a big problem. The chief will at most punish you." Suddenly, Royer's words stopped as he reached toward the mermaid Pearl in Alfonso's arms. Because he realized that Alfonso standing here talking to him for so long was actually just to buy time. However, perhaps because Alfonso usually appeared too honest, Royer was still a step too late. His fingers hadn't yet touched Pearl's beautiful hair when a burst of spatial power suddenly erupted from the person opposite. A portable teleportation formation. Royer quickly withdrew his hand and retreated to avoid having some part of his body taken away by the spatial teleportation formation. watching Alfonso and several mermaids behind him disappear simultaneously, leaving only a few mermaids at the rear of the group standing bewildered. Royer snorted coldly. "If you had saved this trick to deal with me, you might have one, but—" A warm yellow light suddenly lit up on Royer's body, gathering into a beam that shot toward where Alfonso and over a dozen mermaids had just disappeared. After the light entered that area, it suddenly twisted, as if affected by the spatial teleportation power. But although the warm yellow light twisted, it didn't disappear under the influence of the teleportation power and even destroyed part of the force. Then, a figure that had originally disappeared staggered and fell to the ground. It was actually Alfonso, who had just teleported away. But the mermaids behind him and Pearl in his arms hadn't returned with him. Alfonso, lying on the ground, raised his head, losing his composure for the first time. "Chief, why are you here?" Alfonso's lips trembled. According to the original plan, Frym should now be secretly heading to the Sighing Wall, preparing to kill Gorsa. But how could he appear here? Could stopping a few mermaids from escaping be more important than killing Gorsa? The warm yellow light beam merged into a light sphere. Frym's voice came from within. "I haven't completely left Nefrit yet." After Frym finished speaking, Royer raised his chin and said loudly, "Alfonso, the chief delayed his departure because of your matter." Alfonso smiled bitterly and said, "A few mermaids, are they really this important? Worth the chief leaving a strand of consciousness in Royer, worth Royer pretending not to know and cooperating with me in this performance." Frym didn't answer immediately but transmitted information to Royer. "Those mermaids are at. Go bring Pearl back, kill all the others." Alfonso's whole body shook. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Royer smile at him and fly away. Alfonso wanted to chase after him, but just as he took a step, he saw the light sphere before him and regained his rationality. Then the light sphere spoke. "You ask me why I can't let the atavistic mermaids go. I should be asking you, what else are you hiding about the atavistic mermaids? If Royer hadn't told me your attitude toward mermaids was wrong, you might have actually escaped during this brief respite today." Frym lowered his head, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally spoke. "Chief, I've been researching mermaids for nearly 100 years and discovered a fact I don't want to admit but have to acknowledge." The light sphere quietly listened to Frym speak. "I discovered that mermaids. The mermaid race is actually more adapted to this world than wizards, this world threatened by black tides that could be completely destroyed at any time. They have extremely strong natural resistance to black tides. If their soul bodies weren't deliberately damaged by us during reproduction, with their numbers and abilities, they could definitely establish an independent nation. They could develop into a force capable of opposing black tides. Why do we only treat them as trash and consumables?" To be honest, the more I research, the more certain I become of one thing. If this world is nearly completely destroyed by black tides and only one race survives, it would be the normal mermaid race. Frym listened quietly without interrupting Alfonso until he finished and was breathing heavily. Then he spoke. "Whether other races and other forces can adapt to black tides doesn't matter at all. They just need to become materials for the tribunal, letting Nefrit become the surviving continent. You've been charmed by Mermaid Princess Pearl. I didn't expect that even after I destroyed her soul body, she could still use instinct to cast enchantment on you." Alfonso suddenly raised his head, his eyes full of surprise. "So it was you." Chapter 859. Is there a glimmer of hope? Alfonso's heart turned cold. So the tribunal had long ago realized the special superiority of mermaids, and Frym was even more resolute. Regardless of whether Pearl posed any actual threat, he had directly destroyed her soul body first. No wonder, no matter how Alfonso treated her, Pearl's soul body showed no signs of improvement, making Alfonso think that Pearl had accidentally injured her soul body when integrating the mermaid royal bloodline, which was why she forever appeared naive and innocent. Now that he thought about it, before Frem handed Pearl over to Alfonso for research, he had already cut off any possibility for the mermaid princess to become anything other than experimental material. However, the light sphere spoke again. Now, you still have a chance to turn back. But Alfonso didn't relax. I'm afraid I can't agree to your conditions. Refuse and die. Frem's voice was ice cold. Facing the extremely familiar fourth-rank wizard, Alfonso didn't give up resistance. Black mist began drifting from his body. You want to resist? Alfonso tightly pressed his lips, his voice almost squeezing out from between his teeth. I can't die yet. You would search out the mermaid's whereabouts from my soul. Although Royer had already given chase, Alfonso had other arrangements at the mermaid teleportation site. As long as Aqua could activate the secondary teleportation device and destroy the device on the other end, they could temporarily escape Royer. After that, they would abandon the other weak mermaids, draw away the wizard's pursuit, and leave only the strongest mermaids to enter the water from the western coast. Aqua might not be willing, but Coral was the actual executor of the plan. Only this way would there be a possibility of entering the sea area between Nefret and Stat, gaining a glimmer of hope. This was the mermaid escape plan Alfonso had specially formulated, considering that Frem should have already left Nefret at this time. But he hadn't expected that Frem and Royer, in order to draw out all the atavistic mermaids, had actually delayed their original travel plans. And Royer had clearly discovered Alfonso's plan long ago, yet pretended to know nothing while cooperating with Frem to immediately appear and intercept them after he had gathered the atavistic mermaids. In terms of acting skills, Alfonso was no match for him. Although he relied on the instant teleportation formation on his body to send all the mermaids away, Alfonso had to actively exit the teleportation and stay behind to prevent Frem from destroying the transfer. But if he were killed by Frem now, the other would obtain the mermaid's subsequent action plan. Then all of Alfonso's previous preparations would be in vain. So even if what faced him was Frem's consciousness, Alfonso had to break through from here. Even if he could only delay for some time. My apologies, Lord Frem. The black mist instantly spread, enveloping both Alfonso and the light sphere. The warm yellow light sphere immediately burst out with more dazzling light, but the black mist still firmly and slowly devoured all the light. Fortunately, what Frem had here now was only a strand of split consciousness, otherwise Alfonso would have no ability to resist at all. Facing Alfonso's desperate resistance, Frem didn't become angry. Only the color of the light he emitted became increasingly warm. While the two were locked in struggle, Royer had already found the spatial teleportation landing point, according to Frem's guidance. Only a fourth-rank wizard as powerful as Frem could determine the general direction of the landing site in the instant a spatial formation activated. Royer only needed to search continuously in the predetermined direction to discover traces of the mermaids. Of course, there was another key point. This spatial teleportation formation was an instantly activated small formation, so the teleportation distance wouldn't be too far. If it were a large formation set up in advance, the teleportation distance would be immeasurable and not something Royer could catch up to in a short time. The strong wind blew Royer's wizard robe with a flapping sound, like a prelude to battle, gradually revealing an excited smile on Royer's face. Under this excitement lay immense disappointment and anger. Alfonso, you're supposed to be one of the tribunal's elders, yet you betrayed our will. I gave you so many chances, but you still consider atavistic mermaids more important than the tribunal, more important than our friendship of over 100 years. In a moment, I'll kill all the mermaids you value, leaving none alive. Let's see if you'll still think mermaids are the future masters of this world." Royer had even made up his mind not to spare the life of mermaid Princess Pearl, claiming it was an accidental killing afterward. Even if he would be punished by the chief later, he wouldn't hesitate. He really couldn't accept that his good friend Alfonso actually considered mermaids more important than everything else. Perhaps Alfonso wasn't really putting mermaid interests above everything. After all, he only wanted to release a few mermaids. But Royer, now burning with anger, had become extreme in his thinking, only wanting to kill the trash that led Alfonso astray. After flying for less than 5 minutes, Royer's eyes lit up. He had found the mermaids. Royer quickly descended, following the weak and incomplete mental power belonging to mermaids that he was extremely familiar with. He found the mermaids struggling to crawl through a dense forest. Among them, the pearl-like lustrous mermaid princess was as conspicuous as the morning star in the dark night. Royer's lips curved up. Without even waiting to land, the sky behind him suddenly darkened, and the white clouds overhead seemed to be pressed into ink, rapidly turning black. Then huge orange-red fireballs emerged from the black clouds, falling rapidly with devastating momentum. And the target of their fall was precisely the dozens of mermaids fleeing in the forest. Molten lava descending from heaven, Royer's specialty. Tremendously powerful, with an extremely wide area of effect. With this spell, the entire dense forest below, including all living creatures within, would turn to charcoal. The mermaids on the ground were finally awakened by the commotion overhead. They looked up in panic, and despair followed. Coral gripped Aqua's arm tightly, her sharp fingernails almost piercing her brother's skin. Mr. Blackfish's teleportation formation had nearly been destroyed midway, so their landing point was some distance from the secondary teleportation site. Coral had originally wanted to send her brother and the princess away first, then continue fleeing in a different direction with the other weaker, atavistic mermaids to draw the pursuers' attention. As long as she could hold out for an hour, even half an hour, Aqua could take Princess Pearl into the sea, and then even Coral wouldn't know where they would ultimately go. But she never expected that the terrifying wizard called Royer would catch up to them within 5 minutes. Looking at those terrible red fireballs about to fall, all Coral could think about was, Aqua won't be able to escape either. Just as the scorching fireballs grew larger and larger in their vision, almost filling the mermaids' lives and world, the scene before them suddenly froze. As if someone had paused time. No, time wasn't paused. Something prevented nearby objects from moving. Royer was the first to react. Being in the high sky, he was affected the least and was fastest to sense what had stopped his lava's descent. It was water droplets. Tiny, inconspicuous, yet omnipresent water droplets in the air. Chapter 860, Killing Royer. Who? The mermaid princess in Aqua's arms suddenly let out a long breath, her pale eyelashes trembling lightly as she slowly opened her eyes. Her pearl-colored pupils immediately reflected the full screen of fiery red, along with a tiny bit of water blue. That bit of water blue occupied only a very small part of her vision, yet it instantly captured all of Pearl's attention. Pearl opened her mouth, making meaningless sounds. This sound was like a switch, setting the entire frozen world in motion again. But when those fiery red molten rocks continued to fall, a blue barrier appeared, catching all the lava. A large amount of white steam immediately boiled up with sizzling sounds, while the heat of the gas instantly surged upward toward Royer in midair. Royer immediately retreated, dodging the steam carrying terrifying heat. But he didn't stop attacking. While retreating, he condensed a firebird with 3 pairs of wings in front of him. Wrapped in cracks and accompanied by a mournful cry, it dove headfirst toward the world covered in steam below. The massive Firebird flapped its 3 pairs of even broader wings, directly blasting a clean passage through the large amount of white mist. However, when the passage was cleared, the mermaids that Royer had thought would have long since escaped were actually still standing dumbly in place, looking up at the sky. Royer's momentum slowed, and he immediately felt uneasy. Because where those mermaids were looking, there was nothing. Are they misleading me? Or has whoever was originally there moved at a speed beyond my perception? The former would be fine, but if it were the latter? Royer was a third-rank wizard, but he understood better how terrifying someone who could make him completely unable to sense their presence would be. So after realizing this, Royer immediately retreated. However, just as he retreated 2 meters, his back suddenly collided with a soft object. Then 2 blue arms embraced Royer's body from behind like a lover. Royer immediately burst into crimson flames with all his strength, his entire body becoming a fire man. Under normal circumstances, the flames covering his body surface would next expand into a human form the same as him, but 100 times his body's volume, transforming into a giant fireman to fight for him. But this time, although the flames tried to expand, they couldn't break free from those thin blue arms. His full-strength struggle actually failed. Royer grew anxious, not knowing when such a powerful expert had appeared in Nefret. The person restraining him from behind was undoubtedly a 4th-rank wizard. But where did Nefret have other 4th ranks? Moreover, this suddenly appearing 4th-rank wizard was also one who specialized in water attributes. Among 4th-rank wizards, the only one who specialized in water attributes was the Sky City Lord, Ophelia. A 4th-rank brazenly appearing in territory that didn't belong to them was an action tantamount to directly declaring war on Nefret. Otherwise, Chief Frim wouldn't go through such trouble to secretly head to the Sighing Wall during the Black Tide assault. Since the Sky City Lord has appeared in Nefret, then the situation here isn't something I alone can handle. After failing to break free from the restraint, Royer didn't hesitate. A lantern immediately appeared in his palm. He was going to directly summon Chief Frim. However, before he could use magical power to light the lantern, the blue arms holding Royer suddenly turned into water, and the strange water attribute magical power made it impossible for Royer's flames to ignite anything. After controlling the fire attribute particles, the blue water transformed into a gel-like blue soft substance, directly extending into a protective membrane that rapidly spread over Royer's entire body, covering him like an outer garment. Even facing the Sky City Lord, Royer wouldn't surrender without a fight. He prepared to explode again, but his brain suddenly rang with a buzz. It was as if someone had forcibly restarted his brain. When Royer tried to mobilize magical power again, he discovered that his spiritual body had begun violently oscillating irregularly, completely unable to condense magical power. Now, Royer could no longer struggle at all. He had started as the hunter, but had fallen to become the prey. His eyes were full of anger. The next second, Royer's head was gripped by the blue gel and forcibly twisted more than 20 times around his neck. Such severe injury put even Royer into a near-death state in an instant. But it wasn't over yet. After completely sealing Royer, the blue gel began destructive twisting and stirring. Soon, this powerful 3rd-rank wizard who was among the best in the tribunal was sealed in the blue gel and completely reduced to a pile of minced meat. His formidable body and vast magical power seemed like a soft cake before the blue gel, easily crushed to pieces with a gentle squeeze. A voice came from within the blue gel. The soul disappeared, already prepared positioning for escape in advance. Ha! The blue gel expanded and contracted for a while, turning the wizard's corpse inside into nutrients and directly absorbing them. Then the gel contracted and transformed into a water spirit that also had a fish tail. The mermaids below watched the entire process of Wizard Royer's death and were now almost scared senseless. Coral gripped Aqua's arm tightly, her whole body trembling. Aqua almost let go of Pearl in his arms. The other mermaids were even worse off. Several were lying on the ground shivering, not even daring to look at the water spirit above. The water spirit slowly descended and met the gaze of the only relatively composed mermaid princess. Pearl also looked up at the water spirit in a daze, her mouth opening even wider, her vocal cords vibrating to produce meaningless sounds. He was right. Coming here at this time, I really could see a good show, Floco said with a light laugh. Then, he turned to look toward the ocean, where the black clouds had already retreated to the deep sea area. This black tide invasion was entering its final phase. Soon, the tribunal would be able to mobilize large numbers of personnel to hunt down the mermaids. If Floco wanted to save these mermaids, he needed to speed up. He looked down at the ground again. By now, Aqua and Coral had recovered some courage and could look directly at Floco normally. Pearl still watched Floco with some bewilderment and curiosity. Like this, you can't be a mermaid princess. If you want to continue the mermaid race, you can't be a leader either. Floco couldn't help but sigh. What a pity about your decent royal abilities. He looked at Coral and Aqua again. You two aren't bad. Although your bloodline concentration isn't very high, at least you're normal mermaids. If you can escape the tribunal's shackles, there's still hope to survive in this apocalypse. Neither Coral nor Aqua responded. They didn't recognize Floco, although their intuition told them he was somehow related to them. Aqua was also very afraid, but thinking of Coral behind him, he gathered his courage. "Hello, are you here to pick us up?"